It was a typical day at the prestigious Global Tech Innovation Conference, where scientists, engineers, and tech enthusiasts gathered to discuss the future of humanity's technological breakthroughs. The atmosphere was filled with excitement, intellectual debates, and groundbreaking ideas. On stage, Elon Musk was delivering one of his most anticipated talks on the future of space exploration and artificial intelligence. His reputation as the visionary behind SpaceX and Tesla preceded him, and the audience hung on every word he spoke. However, no one could have predicted what was about to happen next. Amidst the sea of adults, one small figure caught the eyes of everyone in the room, a 5-year-old girl, sitting quietly at the front row. Her name was Emma, and she wasn't there by accident. She had been invited by the event organizers after a string of remarkable incidents had captured the attention of the tech community. Emma had already solved college-level math problems, presented theories about quantum physics, and had even written her own basic algorithm for a machine learning model. But it was her next action that stunned everyone. Elon Musk, as always, wasn't one to shy away from a challenge. With a smirk, he stepped up to the podium and glanced at the audience before turning his attention toward Emma. "Let's see if our young friend can solve something more difficult," Elon said, his voice casual but full of intrigue. He then typed a complex differential equation onto the screen behind him. The room fell silent. It was a question meant to challenge even the most seasoned mathematicians in the room, but Emma didn't flinch. In fact, she barely looked at the equation before raising her hand, as if it was the simplest thing in the world. The crowd watched in disbelief as the tiny figure of Emma stood up and, with absolute confidence, walked toward the whiteboard. She picked up a marker and began solving the equation with a speed and accuracy that left everyone dumbfounded. Within moments, the problem was completed, perfectly. The audience erupted into stunned applause, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or simply gasp in amazement. But it wasn't just the answer that left them speechless. It was the ease with which Emma had solved the equation, as though it were something she had done 1,000 times before. It was a moment that would define this conference for years to come. Elon Musk stood there, his arms crossed, staring at the young girl in astonishment. He was the one who had been known to challenge the impossible, but now, for the first time in his life, he felt as though he had encountered something beyond his comprehension. A 5-year-old had just done what many of the brightest minds in the room could not. The applause died down, but the questions began to surface. Who was this child? Was this a freak accident? Or was she truly capable of such incredible feats? Elon turned to the crowd with a raised eyebrow, his usual cocky confidence replaced by a look of genuine curiosity. "What do you think? Should we have her join us in the next SpaceX mission?" He joked, but his tone was serious. He wasn't just impressed, he was intrigued. As he looked at Emma, the little girl smiled up at him, unbothered by the attention. There was something in her eyes, a spark of intelligence and determination, that made it clear this wasn't a fluke. This was just the beginning of something much bigger. Elon's mind raced. He had seen genius before, but never in someone so young, never in a child whose entire life had yet to unfold. His curiosity piqued and a question lingered. What if the future of innovation wasn't just in the hands of people like him, but in the hands of children like Emma? The audience remained hushed, captivated by the moment. But one thing was certain. What had just happened would leave a lasting impact on everyone in that room. And for Elon Musk, this was more than just a startling encounter. It was the beginning of a journey he hadn't expected, one that would force him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about intelligence, technology, and the future. What would happen next? Could a 5-year-old truly change the course of history? As Emma returned to her seat, still smiling serenely, the crowd began whispering amongst themselves, and Elon Musk took a deep breath. The world had just witnessed something extraordinary, and this was only the beginning. What do you think about Emma's talent? Is it just luck, or is there something deeper at play here? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Elon Musk is no stranger to pushing boundaries. From founding Zip2, to revolutionizing the electric car industry with Tesla, to launching rockets into space with SpaceX, Elon has made a name for himself as one of the world's most innovative and ambitious entrepreneurs. His ventures have reshaped the way humanity thinks about technology, energy, and even the possibility of life beyond Earth. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, Elon was always a dreamer. As a child, he immersed himself in books, teaching himself computer programming at the age of 10. He was always fascinated by the idea of the future, and his interests ranged from space exploration to artificial intelligence, robotics, and energy sustainability. But what really set him apart was his ability to turn those lofty dreams into reality. By the time Elon was in his mid-30s, he had become a household name. He was the visionary CEO behind Tesla's electric cars and SpaceX's reusable rockets. His ultimate mission? To save humanity, to make life multiplanetary, and to transition the world away from fossil fuels before it was too late. But Elon's ambition wasn't limited to creating companies or technologies. It was about creating a legacy. He was deeply invested in shaping the future. And this future, as he believed, depended on the brightest minds, the innovators, the dreamers, and the problem solvers. As he stood before the audience at the Global Tech Innovation Conference, Elon's usual focus was on the big picture. He was talking about SpaceX's mission to send humans to Mars, Tesla's push toward self-driving cars, and how artificial intelligence could solve problems like climate change and world hunger. His talk was both inspiring and ambitious, as he challenged everyone in the room to think beyond the present and consider the limitless possibilities of the future. But little did he know that his presentation would take an unexpected turn. The girl in the front row, Emma, would soon shift the focus of his entire day and possibly his entire vision for the future. Before the moment with Emma, Elon had always seen himself as the one who was challenging the impossible. He had been the one to push the boundaries, the one to disrupt industries, and the one to question established norms. He had faced criticism, doubters, and naysayers throughout his career, but he had always come out on top, driven by the belief that humanity's greatest advancements were yet to come. So, when he first saw the 5-year-old sitting quietly in the front row, Elon had no idea what was about to unfold. A child in the front row of his presentation? Sure, that wasn't unusual. There were always young students eager to learn. But when she casually solved that complex mathematical equation in front of everyone, it hit him like a ton of bricks. It was as if the universe had handed him a riddle he couldn't solve. Who was this girl? And why was she capable of doing what even the most seasoned experts in the room couldn't? Elon was no stranger to meeting prodigies. He had worked with brilliant scientists, engineers, and mathematicians in his career. But none of them had been 5 years old. As he reflected on the events of that day, a feeling of awe began to take root in his mind. There was something special about Emma, a raw, unfiltered intelligence that couldn't be explained by textbooks or traditional education. She had cracked a code that Elon himself hadn't seen coming. And this feeling of awe was not just about her intellectual capabilities. It was about the possibility that Emma represented. What if, as he had always believed, the future of humanity was in the hands of the next generation? What if the key to solving some of the most pressing challenges facing the world wasn't just in the hands of established professionals, but in the hands of children like Emma, who had an entirely fresh perspective on the world? But there was something more than just raw intelligence. Emma had an energy about her, an almost mystical presence, as if she was channeling something beyond herself. Elon couldn't quite place it, but it intrigued him. Was it possible that this young girl was not just a mathematical prodigy but a symbol of something greater? That thought nagged at Elon throughout the rest of the conference. Even as he continued to speak and meet with other innovators, his mind kept drifting back to Emma. He knew that the world was full of extraordinary individuals. He had worked with some of the best and brightest. But Emma was different. She wasn't just a brilliant mind. She was a window into the future. As the conference drew to a close, Elon found himself asking a question he had never thought to ask before. What if the future of science and technology wasn't just about data, machines, or even artificial intelligence? What if it was about a new kind of thinking, one that emerged from the most unexpected places? And if that was true, how could he, as a leader in innovation, help shape a world that embraced this new way of thinking? Emma was not like any other 5-year-old. At her age, most children were still learning the basics of reading, writing, and simple math. They were busy playing with toys or watching cartoons, soaking in the wonder of a world that was still filled with magic and mystery. But Emma? She saw the world differently. She was a child who could solve college-level math problems, explain the theories behind quantum physics, and speak about artificial intelligence with an understanding that most adults could only dream of. Her story didn't begin in the confines of a traditional classroom. In fact, Emma's parents had long realized that their daughter was no ordinary child. Both of Emma's parents were deeply involved in the world of technology. Her father was a software engineer and her mother, a neuroscientist. From an early age, Emma was exposed to an environment that encouraged intellectual curiosity. The books she read weren't typical children's stories. Instead, she devoured books on science, mathematics, and the universe, soaking in knowledge that was often reserved for those much older than her. Her parents had noticed Emma's unusual talent when she was just a toddler. At the age of 2, she started solving simple puzzles that would stump even older children. By 3, Emma could solve arithmetic problems that many second graders struggled with. But it wasn't until she turned 4 that her parents realized the full extent of her abilities. One afternoon, while her mother was working on a neuroscience research paper at the kitchen table, Emma sat down beside her and picked up a complex algebra book that had been left open. Her mother, expecting her to quickly grow bored, continued typing. But to her astonishment, Emma began flipping through the pages, quietly solving problems that were well beyond her years. When her mother finally looked up and asked her what she was doing, Emma simply responded, "I'm just learning how to make the numbers balance." It was a moment of pure wonder, a small instance that set the stage for everything that would follow. Emma's parents didn't push her to excel. They didn't want to turn her into a child prodigy or force her into a life she wasn't ready for. Instead, they created an environment of curiosity, free from pressure, where Emma could explore the world on her terms. They bought her books on coding, introduced her to the basics of machine learning, and even took her to local science museums and technology expos. As Emma continued to grow, so did her understanding of the world around her. By the time she was 5, she was fluent in advanced topics like calculus, statistical models, and the basics of computer programming. And it wasn't just that she could solve difficult problems. She could explain them in ways that made complex ideas seem simple. But Emma wasn't just brilliant in the academic sense. She had an insatiable curiosity about the world. While other children her age played games, Emma spent hours watching documentaries on space exploration or reading up on artificial intelligence. She asked questions that even the most seasoned scientists sometimes couldn't answer. Her obsession with space was particularly strong. Emma often talked about the possibility of traveling to Mars, the nature of black holes, and the way rockets could one day allow humans to live on other planets. She would sit at the dinner table, eating her vegetables, and explain how SpaceX's Falcon 9 worked, or why the Mars atmosphere was too thin to support human life without protection. Her parents were in awe of their daughter, but they knew that she was something truly special. They had never pushed her toward any specific area of study. They had simply allowed her to explore. Yet every time she spoke, it was clear that she had a profound understanding of concepts far beyond her years. And while they didn't quite know what the future held for Emma, they couldn't help but wonder, could she change the world? It was this extraordinary intellect and curiosity that had gotten Emma invited to the Global Tech Innovation Conference. The organizers of the conference had heard whispers about the math genius girl, who was solving problems that even college students couldn't crack. When they reached out to Emma's parents, they were both hesitant and excited at the prospect of Emma attending. The first question was obvious. Should we allow a 5-year-old to participate in a conference filled with top scientists and tech moguls? It was a question that had no easy answer. Emma was still so young. Could she handle the pressure? Would she be overwhelmed by the attention? And what if she couldn't perform to the expectations placed on her? But after some thought, Emma's parents decided that if she wanted to go, they would support her. She wasn't your average child. After all, the decision turned out to be one they would never regret. Emma's first moment of fame at the conference came when Elon Musk posed that complex mathematical equation to the room, expecting it to stump everyone, including the brightest minds in the audience. What happened next changed everything. As she walked to the whiteboard, confidently holding the marker in her tiny hand, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. People exchanged incredulous glances, wondering if they were about to witness a stunt or a fluke. But Emma wasn't fazed. She calmly set to work, solving the equation as if it was the simplest thing in the world. The shock in the room was palpable. Everyone in the audience, scientists, engineers, and even Elon Musk himself, watched in awe. It was as if time had frozen for a brief moment, and the only thing that existed in the room was Emma and the equation on the board. When she finished, the room exploded in applause, but it wasn't just because of her mathematical prowess. It was because Emma had demonstrated something more profound. She had shown that there was no limit to what the human mind, even at such a young age, could achieve if given the right environment, support, and encouragement. Elon Musk, who was used to being the one challenging the impossible, stood in stunned silence. His usual confidence faltered for a moment. He wasn't just impressed by Emma's intelligence. He was captivated by the possibilities she represented. Could this child, really be the key to solving some of humanity's most complex problems? Could she be the person who would take humanity to the next level? The days following Emma's remarkable performance at the Global Tech Innovation Conference felt like a whirlwind. News outlets from around the world picked up the story of the 5-year-old girl who had outsmarted even the brightest minds in the room. Headlines screamed about the child prodigy who had solved a complex differential equation without breaking a sweat. Social media buzzed with questions, debates, and excitement. Was Emma just an anomaly? Or was she a glimpse into a new era of human intelligence? But for Emma and her parents, life went on as usual. Well, as usual as it could be for a family now at the center of a global sensation. Elon Musk had always been fascinated by the power of innovation and the potential of the next generation. But Emma's abilities had shaken him in a way he hadn't expected. It wasn't just her exceptional intelligence. It was the way she saw the world. The ease with which she solved problems and her natural ability to grasp complex concepts suggested that she wasn't just a talented child. She was something different, something extraordinary. Over the next few days, Elon reached out to Emma's parents, asking if they would consider a private meeting. At first, they were hesitant. They had seen the way their daughter's talents had captivated the world, but they weren't sure they wanted to thrust Emma into the limelight, especially at such a young age. They were protective of her childhood, wanting her to enjoy her life as a kid, without the pressure of being someone's idea of a genius. But Emma's parents also understood something fundamental. This was no ordinary situation. Their daughter was already on a path that few children could ever imagine, and while they could protect her from the pressure of fame, they couldn't protect her from the opportunity that was unfolding in front of her. So, after much thought, they agreed to meet with Elon. The meeting took place in a quiet, private conference room at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Emma and her parents walked into the room where Elon was waiting, his usual confident demeanor softened by an unmistakable sense of wonder. He stood up when they entered, smiling warmly at Emma. "Hello, Emma," Elon said, his voice kind but with a hint of awe. "It's an honor to finally meet you in person." Emma, as always, smiled back with a simple, unassuming grace. She wasn't fazed by the fact that she was sitting in a room with one of the most influential people on the planet. She wasn't impressed by the high-tech gadgets or the space-related models on the walls. To her, everything was just another opportunity to learn, another chance to explore. Her parents exchanged a glance before sitting down, and Elon motioned for them to take a seat. He was eager to get to the point, but he also knew he needed to tread carefully. "I've been thinking a lot about you, Emma," Elon began. "What you did at the conference was, well, incredible. It got me thinking. The way you solve problems, the way you understand things most adults can't even begin to comprehend. It's rare. And I have a feeling that your mind could help solve some of the biggest challenges facing humanity." Emma looked up at him, her wide brown eyes filled with curiosity. "What kind of problems?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with sincerity. Elon smiled, amused by her directness. "Well, Emma, things like climate change, space exploration, and the future of artificial intelligence. You see, we're standing at the precipice of something big, the future of our planet, and the future of humanity itself. The technologies that we're developing right now will shape the world for generations to come. But it takes the right kind of thinking to make those changes happen. People like you, people who see the world differently, are the ones who can lead us into that future." There was a long silence as Emma processed his words. It wasn't that she didn't understand what Elon was saying. It was more that she had heard these kinds of ideas before. Space exploration, climate change, artificial intelligence. It was all part of the world she had been exposed to since she could remember. But now, it felt more real, more tangible. She thought for a moment, then asked, "How do I help?" Elon's face softened, and for the first time, he looked at her with the full weight of his ambition and vision. "That's what I'm here to find out, Emma. I think you can do something incredible. But first, we need to understand what you're truly capable of. We need to give you the resources, the time, and the freedom to explore and create in ways that no one else has." Emma's parents exchanged another look. They had always wanted the best for their daughter, but this was a level of opportunity they hadn't expected. The thought of Emma working with someone like Elon Musk, the man who had brought humanity closer to the stars, was both thrilling and intimidating. "We want her to have a childhood," Emma's mother said gently. "We don't want her to feel like she's being pushed into something she's not ready for." Elon nodded understandingly. "Of course, that's not my intention. But Emma's talent, her way of thinking, it's something that could change the world. And if we can nurture that in the right way, without overwhelming her, we could be looking at the next generation of leaders. People who will drive change in ways we can't even imagine yet." For a long moment, there was silence in the room. Emma's parents sat deep in thought, weighing the possibilities against the reality of their daughter's future. Finally, Emma spoke again, her voice steady. "I want to help," she said simply. "I want to see if I can make things better." Elon smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "I think we're going to do something amazing together." The next few months were a blur of meetings, discussions, and planning. Emma's parents remained cautiously involved, ensuring that she didn't lose her sense of wonder or childhood in the process. But they also recognized that this wasn't just a normal opportunity. It was a chance to shape the future in ways that most people could only dream of. Elon, for his part, threw himself into helping Emma develop her talents. He connected her with some of the brightest minds at Tesla and SpaceX, who were both amazed and humbled by her intellect. They offered her access to the latest research, tools, and technologies, but they were careful to ensure that the pace was one that kept Emma engaged without overwhelming her. For Emma, it felt like a dream come true. She had always wanted to learn more, to dive deeper into the mysteries of the universe. Now, she had access to the very best resources in the world. And while the attention from the media and the public was intense, Emma's focus remained unwavering. She was determined to use her abilities to explore, create, and, one day, change the world. Little did she know, the journey she had just begun would not only reshape her future, it would change the course of history itself. What do you think about Emma's decision to help shape the future? Is it possible for such a young mind to truly make a difference in the world? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. As Emma's journey continued to unfold, she found herself surrounded by some of the brightest minds on the planet. People who had spent decades studying complex problems, solving riddles of physics, engineering, and technology, were now looking to a 5-year-old for insights and ideas. But it wasn't about looking for answers in the way one might expect. It was about seeing the world through Emma's eyes, eyes that didn't yet carry the weight of adult cynicism or the constraints of conventional thinking. For Elon, working with Emma became a daily reminder of the limitless possibilities that lay ahead. He had spent much of his life thinking about the future, building companies that pushed the boundaries of what humanity could achieve. But now, in this unexpected partnership, he realized that the future wasn't just something to be reached. It was something that could be created, starting right now. And it was Emma who was showing him that. One afternoon, Elon and Emma were sitting in one of SpaceX's high-tech labs, surrounded by whiteboards filled with calculations and diagrams. The walls were lined with models of rockets, satellites, and spacecraft, all in various stages of development. Elon had always loved the smell of fresh ideas in the air. This was where breakthroughs were born, where the impossible became possible. But today, something was different. Today, Emma was the one driving the conversation. Elon had set up a challenge for Emma. It was a problem involving space travel, the kind of complex equations that even seasoned engineers took hours to solve. Emma, however, didn't flinch. She took a seat at the desk, carefully examined the problem, and started working through it in her usual methodical way. Elon watched in awe, not just because of her speed, but because of how effortlessly she seemed to connect abstract concepts that left most adults scratching their heads. "Okay," Elon said, leaning over the desk, "so, if we're trying to find a solution for long-term space travel, let's say to Mars, how do we account for the limited resources we'd have on the way there?" Emma looked up from her work and shrugged, as if the answer was obvious. "We'd need a system that recycles everything," she said simply. "Air, water, food. We can't just bring everything with us. That's not efficient." Elon raised an eyebrow. "That's exactly what we're working on. A closed-loop system that minimizes waste." He paused for a moment, clearly impressed by Emma's grasp of the concept. "But how do you make sure the system works perfectly for the long haul? We can't afford any failures." Emma tapped her pencil against the table, deep in thought. "You use redundancy," she said, "like backup systems. If one part fails, you have another one that kicks in. And you monitor everything constantly. Change the filters, check the levels. It's like a game of survival, except with science." Elon smiled. He hadn't expected such a sophisticated answer from someone so young. But that's exactly what Emma brought to the table, a fresh perspective. A perspective that didn't come with the preconceptions of decades of established thinking. She was thinking beyond the problems of today, toward the world of tomorrow. "Redundancy, huh?" Elon mused. "I guess that's a way of saying we need a backup plan for the backup plan." "I like it." As the conversation continued, Elon realized something profound. Emma wasn't just solving problems. She was reimagining the way they approached them. Her approach wasn't about refining existing ideas. It was about asking the kinds of questions that led to entirely new ways of thinking. As the weeks passed, Elon and Emma grew closer in their unlikely partnership. While Elon was used to being the one with all the answers, he found himself learning just as much from Emma as she learned from him. He had been in the tech and aerospace industries long enough to know that innovation didn't happen by following the rules. It happened when you broke the rules and rethought the impossible. And Emma, in her quiet, unassuming way, had a talent for breaking rules and thinking outside the box. At the same time, Emma's parents continued to play a vital role in her development. They wanted her to remain grounded, to retain the innocence and curiosity that made her so special. While they supported her work with Elon, they also encouraged Emma to enjoy the simple pleasures of childhood. She spent her weekends at the park, playing with friends, riding her bike, and drawing pictures of rockets and planets. They made sure that the balance between her extraordinary intellect and her ordinary life remained intact. One day, as Emma and Elon were discussing the future of Mars colonization, Elon decided to bring up a new idea he had been toying with: artificial intelligence. He had been working on AI for years, trying to create systems that could help humanity solve everything from climate change to disease. But AI, as he saw it, was still in its infancy. What if Emma could offer insight into creating AI that was truly intelligent? AI that could not only solve problems but also understand the human condition. "Emma," Elon began, "I've been thinking a lot about AI lately, but we're still not there yet. We need to create a machine that can think the way humans do, more intuitively, with empathy, understanding, and creativity." Emma looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. "You can't make a machine think like a person," she said after a pause. "It's a person. It has feelings and experiences that make it who it is. A machine doesn't have that." Elon leaned back in his chair, intrigued. "But we can make a machine that can mimic human thought patterns. We can teach it to solve problems, to reason. But you're saying it can't truly be like a person?" Emma nodded. "No, it can't. Not without being alive." Elon was taken aback by her simplicity. "So, what's the solution then?" Emma's eyes lit up with the spark of understanding. "Instead of trying to make the machine think like a person, why not teach it to work with people? A partnership. The machine can help us solve problems, but we still have to be the ones to make the decisions. The human element, creativity, empathy, understanding, that's what makes a person a person." Elon sat in silence for a moment, contemplating her words. It was a radical thought, one that had never crossed his mind before. "You might be onto something, Emma," he said softly. "Maybe the future of AI isn't about replacing humans, but about working alongside us, collaborating in ways we haven't imagined yet. Emma smiled, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Exactly. The more Elon and Emma collaborated, the more their partnership began to take shape. What started as an unlikely alliance, a child prodigy and a tech visionary, soon became something much larger. Together, they were not just solving problems. They were redefining the future of technology, space exploration, and even artificial intelligence. Elon Musk, the man who had once envisioned sending humanity to Mars, now found himself rethinking what humanity's future could truly look like. Not just as individuals, but as a collective, working in harmony with machines to solve the world's most pressing challenges. And at the center of it all was Emma, a 5-year-old girl who had changed everything. As Emma's partnership with Elon Musk deepened, their ideas about the future of humanity began to take shape in unexpected ways. What had started as a curiosity-driven collaboration between a tech mogul and a young genius had now become a mission that would not only change the way we think about artificial intelligence, space travel, and technology, but could also rewrite the trajectory of humanity's future. It wasn't just about solving math problems or designing futuristic machines anymore. It was about a vision, one that was grander than anything either Elon or Emma had ever imagined before. One afternoon, as they sat in a high-tech meeting room at SpaceX headquarters, Elon leaned over the table, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the surface. His mind was racing with ideas, and it was clear that the conversation had shifted towards something much bigger than just a partnership. Emma, Elon said, his voice filled with excitement, what if we could create a sustainable colony on Mars? Not just a base, not just a few people visiting. What if we could build a thriving, self-sustaining community? Emma's eyes lit up with enthusiasm, but she didn't jump in immediately. She always liked to think things through before responding. Elon noticed this and smiled. He had come to respect her approach to problem-solving. She never rushed to answer, always careful to consider all angles. You mean, Emma began slowly, we could send people to Mars, and they wouldn't have to come back to Earth? They could live there, grow food, make energy, and have everything they need? Exactly, Elon said. But there's a catch. We can't just send a group of astronauts to Mars and hope for the best. We need a system that will allow them to survive for years, without relying on Earth for resources. And that's where we need to think differently. We need to build a system that's not just sustainable, but scalable. Something that can grow with time and evolve as the needs of the colony change. Emma thought for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. So, we need to create a closed-loop system. Everything has to be reused and recycled. And the colony needs to be self-sufficient, not just in food and water, but in energy, waste management, and even manufacturing. Elon leaned back in his chair, impressed by her understanding. Yes, exactly. A fully closed-loop system. That means we'll have to rethink everything from how we produce food, to how we manage waste, to how we generate energy. We'll need technologies that don't just sustain life. They'll need to enable life to thrive. Emma nodded. And the people who live on Mars will have to be able to innovate, too. They'll need to think on their feet and come up with solutions for problems we haven't even thought of yet. Elon smiled, his mind racing. He had spent years thinking about the technical aspects of Mars colonization, but Emma's insights were pushing him to think about it in a whole new way. The goal wasn't just to survive on Mars, it was to flourish. And that required more than technology. It required a new mindset. The more they talked, the clearer it became that their vision for Mars wasn't just about space exploration. It was about creating a model for sustainable living on Earth as well. What if the technology they developed to sustain life on Mars could be adapted to solve problems here on Earth? Climate change, resource scarcity, and environmental destruction. These were issues that were already threatening the planet, and the solutions they were creating for Mars might hold the key to solving them. For Emma, this realization was a turning point. She had always been fascinated by space, but now, the mission had a deeper purpose. It wasn't just about reaching Mars. It was about saving Earth and ensuring that humanity's future was sustainable. As their discussions continued, Elon's ideas began to crystallize into a clear plan. He knew that the future of Mars colonization depended on more than just the technologies to get there. It would also require the ability to solve problems and adapt quickly. The people who lived on Mars would have to be innovators, thinkers, and creators. But the tools they used wouldn't just come from SpaceX or Tesla. They needed new ideas, ideas that could only come from people who weren't bogged down by conventional thinking. And that's when Elon had an epiphany. What if the key to all of this, he said to Emma, is not just the technology, but the people we send to Mars? What if the colony could be made up of not just scientists and engineers, but thinkers, people who are creative, people who can solve problems in ways we haven't even imagined yet? Emma's face lit up with excitement. So, instead of picking the smartest people, we pick people who are good at solving problems? People who think differently, like me? Elon chuckled. Exactly. We're not just sending astronauts, we're sending the future of humanity. And we need people who can think outside the box, people who can work together and adapt as the needs of the colony change, people who are ready to face the challenges of creating life from scratch on a new planet. Over the next few months, Emma and Elon worked tirelessly to develop the systems and technologies that would make Mars colonization a reality. They reached out to experts from all over the world, scientists, engineers, architects, and even psychologists, to create a comprehensive plan that would address every aspect of life on Mars. From food production to waste management to energy generation, no stone was left unturned. But what made their plan truly revolutionary was the way they integrated human creativity into the equation. Rather than simply building systems that could function autonomously, they designed the colony with an emphasis on human innovation. The goal wasn't just to survive on Mars, it was to create a community that could thrive, adapt, and evolve over time. They began to experiment with AI systems that could help manage the colony's resources, but also systems that could learn from the people living there. The goal was to create machines that didn't just perform tasks, they would assist the colonists, offering suggestions, solving problems, and adapting to the ever-changing needs of the colony. Emma's insights into human-AI collaboration played a critical role in developing these systems. Meanwhile, Emma's parents continued to support her in balancing her work with a normal childhood. They were proud of her achievements, but they were also determined to make sure she remained grounded. Despite her extraordinary intellect, Emma still loved to draw pictures of rocket ships, play games with her friends, and explore the outdoors. Her parents made sure she had time for those simple joys, knowing that they were just as important to her development as her scientific work. As the weeks turned into months, their vision for the future became clearer. The Mars colony wasn't just a dream. It was a blueprint for how humanity could survive, evolve, and thrive in the face of challenges. And at the center of it all was Emma, whose remarkable ability to think beyond the limits of conventional wisdom had unlocked a new path forward. Emma didn't just want to get to Mars. She wanted to make sure that when humanity arrived, it was ready to build something that could last for generations. She wanted to create a future where innovation, creativity, and sustainability weren't just buzzwords. They were the foundation of everything humanity did. And in that moment, as Emma and Elon Musk looked out at the vast, infinite sky, they knew one thing for certain. They were ready to change the world. As Emma and Elon continued to fine-tune their vision for Mars colonization, a new idea started to take root in their minds. It was an idea that not only had the potential to redefine space exploration, but also to address some of the most pressing challenges facing Earth. The more they discussed it, the more it became clear. The mission to Mars wasn't just about reaching the red planet. It was about creating a blueprint for a sustainable future for humanity, wherever they lived. But to make their vision a reality, they knew they needed more than just innovation and creativity. They needed action. They needed to bring the world together. Scientists, engineers, thinkers, dreamers, and doers, to help make this mission a global endeavor. Emma, with her unique perspective and unwavering optimism, was ready to take the next step. But this time, the stakes were higher. It wasn't just about ideas and experiments anymore. It was about transforming the way humanity viewed its future, and about making sure that future was one in which Earth and Mars weren't separate worlds but interconnected stages in the same human journey. One afternoon, as they sat in a strategy meeting at SpaceX headquarters, Elon looked across the table at Emma, his mind buzzing with excitement. "We need to bring this vision to the world," he said, a determined look in his eyes. "This isn't just about us anymore. We need to inspire others. We need to gather a team, a global team, that will make this dream happen. We need to show the world that the future is in our hands." Emma, who had been scribbling in her notebook, paused and looked up, her face thoughtful. "So, we need to build a movement. A movement of people who believe in the possibility of a future where we're not just surviving, but thriving. A movement that makes people believe they can be part of something bigger than themselves." Elon nodded, a spark of admiration in his eyes. "Exactly. A movement. And it starts with us, showing the world that if a 5-year-old can come up with ideas that could change the course of human history, then anyone can be part of this. We need to create a sense of urgency, a call to action that inspires people to think differently, to break away from the limitations of today, and start building the future." Emma smiled, her excitement palpable. "So, we get the word out. We show people that Mars isn't just a distant dream. It's something we can do now. And we need thinkers, doers, creators, everyone who is ready to join this mission." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Elon and Emma began assembling a team of the best and brightest minds from all corners of the globe. Scientists, engineers, architects, environmentalists, psychologists, and educators. They all became part of the movement, united by a common goal: to make the Mars mission a reality, and in doing so, create a sustainable, thriving future for humanity. But they didn't stop there. They realized that if they were going to inspire the world, they needed to communicate the vision in a way that was simple, yet compelling. They needed to make people believe that the Mars mission wasn't just an endeavor for the elite few. It was for everyone. They needed to empower the public, showing them that this was not a dream for the distant future, but a call to action for the present. Elon decided to do something unconventional, something that would get the attention of millions. He scheduled a live-streamed event where he and Emma would present their vision for Mars, laying out a plan for not just the technological and logistical aspects of the mission, but also the social, cultural, and educational initiatives that would make it a global movement. The announcement was met with immediate excitement. Social media buzzed with anticipation. People from all over the world began to speculate about what Elon and Emma were about to reveal. Could this be the moment humanity began to take the next giant leap forward? When the day of the event arrived, a massive crowd gathered online. Elon sat in front of a camera, his usual calm and focused demeanor taking on a new sense of urgency. Beside him, Emma sat with her trademark confidence, ready to share her thoughts with the world. The livestream began, and Elon started by addressing the crowd. "Today marks a turning point in the history of humanity. We're not just dreaming about the future, we're building it. The mission to Mars is not just a technological challenge. It's a chance for all of us to rethink how we live, how we interact with the world, and how we can come together to build a better future, both here on Earth and on Mars." He paused and turned to Emma. "But this isn't just about rockets and space stations. This is about people. People like Emma, who remind us that creativity, collaboration, and a sense of wonder are just as important as technology. Emma, would you like to share your thoughts with the world?" Emma's face brightened, and she looked directly into the camera. "Hi everyone. I'm Emma, and I'm 5 years old. I'm here to tell you that the future of humanity is in our hands. And it's not just about rockets and spaceships. It's about us, how we work together, how we think, and how we create things that solve problems. Mars isn't just a place to go. It's a place to grow. We're not just going to Mars to visit. We're going to live there. We're going to build something that lasts." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. "But we can't do it alone. We need everyone to help. We need you, people who believe in big ideas and want to be part of something amazing. Together, we can solve problems, make discoveries, and change the world. Earth and Mars are connected, and together, we can make both of them better." The crowd watching online was silent for a moment, before erupting into applause. Elon looked at Emma, his pride evident in his eyes. The response was overwhelming. People from all walks of life, scientists, students, teachers, engineers, artists, and activists, started to rally behind the cause. The idea of a sustainable Mars colony, powered by human ingenuity and collaboration, spread like wildfire. But even more importantly, the idea that humanity could build a better future, not just on Mars, but here on Earth, resonated with millions. The movement had begun. The world was no longer just watching from the sidelines. People were joining the effort, contributing ideas, donating resources, and offering their skills in ways that Elon and Emma had never imagined. The Mars mission wasn't just a goal. It was a collective effort, one that transcended borders, cultures, and ideologies. But with this newfound momentum came a challenge: how to keep the energy and focus alive. How could they ensure that this wasn't just another passing trend, but a sustained movement that would change the course of history? That's where Emma's wisdom would prove invaluable. She had always believed that the key to success wasn't in technology alone, but in the human spirit, the creativity, the drive, and the belief that anything was possible. She had shown Elon that the future wasn't something to be feared. It was something to be embraced. And now, she was showing the world the same thing. The buzz surrounding Emma and Elon's livestream event was unlike anything the world had ever seen. What began as a single moment, a spark of inspiration, had turned into a global movement. People from all walks of life were rallying behind the idea of a Mars mission, but more than that, they were rallying behind the concept of a future that didn't just rely on escaping Earth, but on transforming the way humanity lived, thought, and worked. Within weeks, new initiatives started popping up. Schools around the world began adopting new curriculums that emphasized problem-solving, innovation, and sustainability. Tech startups sprang to life, offering solutions that could be adapted both to space exploration and to addressing the needs of Earth. Nonprofit organizations formed to raise awareness about the importance of science, collaboration, and environmental stewardship, skills that would be crucial for colonizing Mars and for preserving life on Earth. But while excitement spread, the road ahead was anything but easy. With a movement this large, there would always be detractors, skeptics, and obstacles. And for Emma and Elon, the real work was just beginning. It was late one evening when Elon and Emma sat together in a quiet room at SpaceX headquarters. Elon was gazing at a blueprint of the Mars colony, a map that was becoming more detailed with every passing day. Emma, as usual, was flipping through pages of complex data and mathematical models, her eyes alight with focus. "You know," Elon said after a few moments, breaking the silence, "I've been thinking a lot about what happens after we get to Mars. We've got the tech, the team, the vision. But what happens once we land? How do we make sure we don't just survive, but thrive?" Emma looked up from her notebook, her eyes filled with a quiet confidence. "It's not just about getting there. It's about how we set things up to make sure the people who live on Mars can thrive. I mean, if we can create a society where people are self-sufficient, innovative, and always learning, we can build a new kind of future. It's all about making the right choices at the beginning." Elon leaned in, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "Well, think about it," Emma said, tapping her fingers on the table. "The first group of colonists is going to face some of the toughest challenges we've ever seen. Life support systems, agriculture, energy production. But we don't just want them to get by. We want them to grow. We need to set up systems that help them adapt, that make sure they can solve problems without waiting for someone on Earth to tell them what to do. People who are living on Mars need to be empowered to make decisions, create new technologies, and come up with solutions to problems as they arise." Elon sat back in his chair, clearly impressed. "You're talking about a self-sustaining, adaptable society. A place where innovation doesn't just come from a top-down approach, but from everyone. Every person on Mars could be a problem solver, a creator. It's not just about technology, it's about mindset." "Exactly," Emma said, her voice filled with determination. "That's the key to not just surviving, but thriving. And it starts with how we train the people who go there. They need to understand the importance of creativity, flexibility, and collaboration. The Mars colony can't just be a place where people work in isolation. It has to be a place where ideas are shared, and where every person has the freedom to experiment, to innovate, and to grow." Elon smiled. "I like the way you think, Emma. You're not just looking at the technical aspects. You're looking at the heart of what it means to build a new world." As the conversation shifted toward the specifics of Mars colonization, Emma's role continued to evolve. She was no longer just the brilliant child prodigy working alongside Elon Musk. She was now an integral part of a much larger team. a team that was tasked with solving some of the most pressing issues humanity would face in the coming decades. Emma's idea about empowering individuals to innovate and solve problems was beginning to take shape in the form of a new educational initiative. It wasn't enough to simply send highly trained experts to Mars. The people who would live there had to be prepared not only with technical skills, but also with the mindset of creativity and adaptability. Elon and Emma began working with educators from around the world to develop a new curriculum, one that would be used both to prepare the first generation of Mars colonists and to inspire students on Earth to think differently about their future. The goal was clear: to create a world where everyone, no matter their background or age, could contribute to humanity's journey to the stars. The initiative, called Mars Academy, launched with a simple yet powerful mission: empower the next generation to think beyond the Earth and build a future for all of humanity, on Mars and on Earth. The curriculum wasn't just about science or technology. It was about teaching students how to think critically, how to collaborate with people from different backgrounds, and how to create solutions to problems they hadn't yet encountered. Teachers were encouraged to foster a culture of curiosity and innovation, where failure wasn't seen as something to be feared, but as a necessary step in the creative process. The Mars Academy initiative was a resounding success. Schools from across the world adopted the curriculum, and soon, thousands of students were immersed in a new way of learning. From designing sustainable energy systems to developing ideas for Mars agriculture, the students weren't just preparing for the future, they were actively shaping it. But the global revolution wasn't limited to education. Elon and Emma's call to action had inspired people to take tangible steps toward building a better future, both on Earth and in space. As the world rallied behind the Mars mission, governments, corporations, and nonprofits began investing heavily in the technologies needed for Mars colonization. Solar energy, carbon capture, and closed-loop systems became the focus of research and development, as people everywhere realized that the same technologies needed for Mars could be used to solve pressing issues on Earth: climate change, resource depletion, and environmental destruction. Soon, the idea of colonizing Mars was no longer a far-off dream. It was an achievable goal, a goal that would require the collective effort of every nation, every person, and every idea. It was a movement that transcended borders and politics, united by the common purpose of securing a sustainable future for humanity. As Emma and Elon looked out over the world they were helping to create, they knew the journey ahead would be long, filled with challenges and setbacks. But they also knew one thing for certain: the revolution was just beginning. As the weeks passed, the momentum behind the Mars mission and the Mars Academy initiative continued to grow. What had once been an idea on a whiteboard was now becoming an unstoppable force, transforming the way the world thought about space, sustainability, and the future of humanity. Elon Musk and Emma were no longer simply visionaries. They were catalysts, sparking a global movement that was bringing humanity together in ways never seen before. The success of their initiative was undeniable. In every corner of the world, young minds were being shaped by the Mars Academy curriculum. And it wasn't just students who were inspired, it was entire communities. Entrepreneurs, innovators, and thinkers were coming together, creating new technologies, solutions, and businesses that had the potential to change the course of history. The world was starting to understand that the Mars mission wasn't just about reaching another planet. It was about creating a new kind of future, one where innovation, collaboration, and sustainability were at the heart of everything. But even as things were progressing, there were still questions. There were those who doubted that humanity could ever colonize Mars, those who believed that Earth's problems were so vast that looking beyond the planet was nothing more than a distraction. Others argued that the risks involved were too great and the costs too high. Despite the growing enthusiasm for the Mars mission, the road to interplanetary colonization would not be an easy one. One late afternoon, Elon and Emma sat in a conference room, surrounded by a team of engineers, scientists, and strategists. They were preparing for one of the most critical moments in the history of the Mars mission, a massive press conference where they would unveil the next stage of their plans. It was going to be a historic moment, the announcement of the first crewed mission to Mars. Elon, as usual, was deep in thought, flipping through a series of slides on his tablet. "We've got the tech, the team, the backing," he said, his voice steady but full of anticipation. But the world needs to see that this isn't just about sending people to Mars. It's about making life on Mars possible. Emma, sitting beside him, nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. The mission to Mars is about proving that humanity can create something incredible. It's not just a one-time trip. It's the start of something that will last. A new way of life, a new frontier for humanity. We can build it, but we need the world to believe in it. Elon smiled at her. That's why your voice is so important. People hear you and see the possibility. You don't just talk about Mars, you talk about the future. You're showing people what can be done, not just with technology, but with creativity and courage. The day of the press conference arrived, and the atmosphere at SpaceX headquarters was electric. Hundreds of journalists, scientists, and curious onlookers packed the room, eager to hear the next step in the journey to Mars. The lights dimmed, and the screens behind Elon and Emma flickered to life, showing stunning images of the red planet. Elon took the stage first, his usual calm presence filling the room. Today, we stand at the threshold of an incredible new chapter in human history. For years, the idea of humans living on another planet has been seen as science fiction, a dream of the distant future. But today, we are making that dream a reality. The first crewed mission to Mars will take place in just 2 years. This mission is not just about reaching Mars. It's about building a self-sustaining human presence on the red planet. A place where humanity can thrive, not just survive. A place where we can prove that the challenges of today can be met with the creativity and innovation of tomorrow. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to Emma, who stood up beside Elon. The camera lenses zoomed in on her, her youthful face filled with determination. "Hi, everyone," Emma began, her voice steady but filled with excitement. "I'm Emma, and I'm here to tell you that Mars isn't just a place we want to visit. It's a place we're going to live. We're not just going there to plant flags and take pictures. We're going to build a new society, a new home. We're going to create a future for humanity where we're not just surviving, but thriving. And we're going to do it together by thinking big, working together, and never giving up." Emma paused, letting her words sink in. This mission isn't just for scientists or engineers. It's for everyone, for every student who dreams of becoming a scientist, for every parent who wants a better future for their children, for every person who believes that humanity is capable of greatness. The Mars mission is about us, about you, about all of us working together to build the future. And it starts today. The audience erupted into applause, and Emma's words spread like wildfire. Social media buzzed with excitement, and soon, news outlets from around the world were sharing the message. The first crewed mission to Mars wasn't just a headline. It was the beginning of a movement. The world wasn't just watching. It was becoming a part of the mission. In the weeks that followed, the Mars mission gained unprecedented support. People everywhere were excited about the possibilities, about the chance to be part of something greater than themselves. Governments and private companies began working together in ways that had never been seen before. Collaborations between NASA, SpaceX, universities, and tech giants created a network of innovation that was propelling humanity forward. And then came the announcement. The first group of colonists was selected, an eclectic mix of scientists, engineers, doctors, and artists. Each one was chosen not just for their technical expertise, but for their ability to think creatively, to solve problems, and to work together in the face of the unknown. These were not just astronauts, they were pioneers of a new age. But even as the excitement built, there were still challenges to face. The mission to Mars was no small feat. The risks were enormous, and the unknowns were vast. Could the crew survive the long journey? Would they be able to establish a sustainable colony? What challenges would they face on the surface of the red planet? And yet, as Elon and Emma stood side by side, watching the final preparations unfold, they knew that the risks were part of the journey. They had already accomplished the hardest part, getting the world to believe that the future was something they could build together. The next step was clear. Mars wasn't just a destination. It was the beginning of a new era for humanity. A new frontier where the impossible was not just possible, but inevitable. What excites you most about the possibility of living on Mars? Is it the technology, the opportunity for exploration, or something else? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. The excitement around the Mars mission reached new heights in the months following the historic press conference. As the first crewed mission to Mars drew closer, it became clear that humanity was on the brink of something monumental. A once-distant dream was quickly becoming a tangible reality, and the whole world seemed to be watching with bated breath. At SpaceX, the final stages of preparation were underway. The team was working tirelessly, ensuring every detail was accounted for. Every piece of technology was tested, and every possible risk was mitigated. The crew members who had been selected for the mission were undergoing intense training, learning everything from how to live in the confined spaces of the spacecraft to the intricacies of Martian agriculture. And then there was Emma. Despite her young age, she had become one of the most powerful symbols of the Mars mission. Her voice, her ideas, and her unshakable belief in the possibility of a better future had inspired millions around the globe. She wasn't just a spokesperson. She was a bridge between two worlds, the one we knew and the one we were about to create. One crisp morning, as Elon and Emma sat in SpaceX's Mission Control Center, a message came through on the large screens in front of them. It was from the crew of the first Mars mission, a final check-in before the launch. Elon leaned forward, his face a mix of pride and determination, while Emma's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Ready for this, Emma?" Elon asked, his voice steady. Emma grinned. "I think the question is Mars ready for us?" Elon chuckled, but there was no mistaking the seriousness of the situation. "This is the biggest step humanity has ever taken, but I think we've prepared as much as we possibly can. Now, we just have to trust in the plan and in each other." The countdown to the launch was set to begin in 3 days, and the world was watching. Every news outlet, every social media platform, every corner of the globe seemed to be focused on one thing: the journey to Mars. The crew had been prepped, their mission clear. They weren't just embarking on a scientific expedition, they were pioneering a new era for humanity. They were the first to make the long journey to Mars, but their success would pave the way for countless others to follow. And yet, despite the preparations, there was still an undercurrent of uncertainty. Would they succeed? Could they overcome the inevitable challenges they would face on Mars? As Elon and Emma prepared for the next phase of the journey, they understood that success wasn't guaranteed. But one thing was certain: they had made it possible for humanity to even dream of such an endeavor. And that, in itself, was a victory. The day of the launch arrived, and the world's eyes were on the SpaceX facility. Crowds gathered around the globe to watch the historic event unfold. Families huddled around their television screens, while students and educators took to their computers to watch the live stream. It was more than just a rocket launch. It was the first step in humanity's great adventure. Inside the launch control room, the air was thick with anticipation. The crew, already suited up and ready for takeoff, stood beside the spacecraft. Their faces were a mix of nervous excitement, pride, and resolve. This was not just a trip to another planet. It was the beginning of a new chapter for humanity. Elon and Emma stood together, side by side, watching the final countdown unfold. Emma squeezed Elon's hand. "You know," she said, her voice almost a whisper, "it's not just about getting to Mars. It's about what happens next." Elon looked down at her, his expression softening. "I know, Emma, but we can't get to the next part without this first step." The countdown continued. 10 seconds. 9. 8. The tension was palpable. And then, with a roar that shook the ground, the rocket blasted off into the sky, leaving behind a trail of fire and smoke. For a moment, everything seemed to pause. The entire world held its breath as the rocket soared higher and higher, carrying humanity's hopes and dreams with it. "Liftoff," the voice from Mission Control declared. The crowd erupted into applause, and for the first time, Elon and Emma allowed themselves to breathe. As the rocket ascended into the atmosphere, the crew on board began their journey through the vastness of space. For the next 6 months, they would travel through the cold, dark void toward Mars. Every moment of the journey would be meticulously planned, every risk accounted for. Yet, there was something undeniably exciting about the unknown ahead. Emma turned to Elon, her eyes full of wonder. "Do you think they're ready?" she asked. "I think they are," Elon replied, his voice firm but filled with a quiet optimism. "The training, the planning. It's all led to this. And now, we just have to trust that the work we've done will get them there safely. Emma nodded. And then they'll do the rest. They'll make history. Over the next several months, as the spacecraft traveled closer to Mars, the world's attention remained fixed on the journey. The media covered every detail of the mission, from the daily reports on the health of the crew to the progress of their research and experiments. Social media was flooded with updates, photos, and videos of the astronauts in space, and the excitement surrounding the mission continued to grow. Back on Earth, the Mars Academy initiative grew even stronger. The curriculum had been embraced in schools around the world, and students everywhere were learning about the science of space exploration, sustainability, and problem-solving. Many students, inspired by Emma's voice and the success of the Mars mission, began to dream of one day becoming part of the next wave of colonists. And for the first time, it seemed like anything was possible. But even as the mission progressed, there were challenges to face. The journey to Mars was long, and the crew faced unexpected obstacles. Technical malfunctions, isolation, and the strain of living in such a confined space tested their resolve. But they were undeterred. After all, this was what they had been trained for. This was what they had dreamed of for so long. And with each passing day, they grew closer to their destination. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the moment arrived. The crew approached Mars, its vast, barren surface just visible through the windows of the spacecraft. The red planet loomed ahead, and the crew members could hardly believe what they were seeing. After years of planning, training, and dreaming, they were about to land on Mars. They were about to take the first step toward building a new world. As Elon and Emma watched the final stages of the mission unfold from Earth, there was a moment of silence. The countdown to landing had begun. The crew's faces were filled with anticipation as they prepared for the delicate descent. There was no turning back now. The world watched, holding its breath, as the spacecraft descended toward the Martian surface. The Martian landscape stretched out before them, barren, desolate, and yet undeniably beautiful. A world unlike anything the crew had ever seen, stretching to the horizon in hues of deep reds and oranges. The moment had arrived. After 6 months of traveling through the cold void of space, the crew was minutes away from becoming the first humans to set foot on another planet. Their spacecraft descended toward Mars, and the whole world watched in hushed anticipation. Inside the spacecraft, the crew members were silent, focused, and prepared. Every action, every move was rehearsed. There was no room for error. The weight of history pressed down on them, but they had trained for this. They had prepared for this moment their entire lives. The lead astronaut, Captain Naomi Cole, looked out of the window as Mars grew larger. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her expression remained calm. She had always known that this moment would come. Still, nothing could prepare her for the overwhelming sense of awe she felt as she watched the red planet grow larger, closer, and clearer. Approaching landing site, she said over the comms, her voice steady. "All systems go." "Roger that, Captain," came the reply from Mission Control on Earth. Elon and Emma, along with a team of engineers and specialists, were monitoring the landing closely from SpaceX headquarters. Every part of the mission was being tracked live, and the tension was palpable. Elon, watching the screens with Emma by his side, said quietly, "This is it. We've been talking about it for years, but to see it happen, it's surreal." Emma, her gaze fixed on the screen, smiled softly. "It's real now, Elon. They're not just making history, they're creating the future." As the spacecraft's thrusters fired to slow its descent, the crew members followed the carefully timed procedures. Naomi Cole and her team were performing the delicate landing maneuvers that would bring them safely to the Martian surface. It was a long, tense process, but everything seemed to be progressing as planned. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the thrusters cut off. The landing gear touched down gently, and the spacecraft settled onto the Martian soil. There was a brief moment of silence before the voices on Earth erupted in celebration. "We've landed," Naomi said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. But those words carried the weight of 1,000 dreams. Back on Earth, the reaction was nothing short of explosive. People everywhere cheered, cried, and hugged one another as the news spread like wildfire. The world had just witnessed the dawn of a new era. At SpaceX headquarters, Elon and Emma exchanged a glance, a look that said everything without words. This was the culmination of years of hard work, of impossible dreams turned into reality. But they both knew that this was just the beginning. The real challenge would come in the days, months, and years ahead. The first task was simple but monumental. The crew needed to exit the spacecraft, step onto the surface of Mars, and plant the flag that symbolized humanity's first victory on another world. But even this simple act required incredible precision, as every moment counted. The crew had spent months practicing the procedures, adjusting to the weightlessness of space, the low gravity of Mars, and the complexity of their spacesuits. As Naomi stepped toward the airlock, she couldn't help but pause for a moment, taking in the view of the planet they had traveled so far to reach. Mars, with its dusty red surface and distant horizon, seemed both lifeless and full of potential. A blank canvas, waiting for humanity's touch. She exhaled sharply, then stepped into the airlock. The team was ready. "We're ready to make history," she said, her voice filled with resolve. Back in the control room, Elon and Emma stood side by side, eyes glued to the monitor. The live feed showed Naomi slowly descending the ramp, her suit glinting in the harsh sunlight of Mars. The other crew members followed, stepping out into the unknown. With a deep breath, Naomi reached the surface and planted her boot firmly on the Martian soil. For a moment, she simply stood there, taking it all in. The first human to set foot on Mars. The first of many. Then, she spoke into her calm, her voice trembling with emotion. "This is the first step. We are no longer earthbound. Humanity has reached beyond our home. We stand on Mars, and the future is ours to shape." The world watched in awe as Naomi and her crew made their historic first steps, their movements slow and deliberate, the Martian landscape stretching out in all directions. The world's first Martian explorers were making their mark, carving their place in history. As Naomi planted the flag, an emblem of hope, unity, and exploration, a new chapter began for humanity. The significance of that flag, standing proudly against the red Martian sky, was not lost on anyone. It represented the idea that nothing was impossible, that even in the face of enormous challenges, humans could reach for the stars and succeed. Back on Earth, celebrations were erupting everywhere. People flooded the streets of major cities, cheering and waving banners. Children wore space-themed costumes, inspired by the bravery and ambition of the astronauts who had paved the way. It was a victory not just for the crew, but for the entire human race. Emma, watching the live stream from SpaceX headquarters, felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond words. She had always believed in this moment, but to see it unfold before her eyes was something entirely different. She turned to Elon, who was still watching the feed intently. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" Emma said quietly. Elon smiled, his eyes reflecting the same quiet optimism that had driven him for years. "This is only the first step, Emma. We've made it to Mars, but now we have to make sure humanity thrives there. This is where the real work begins." Emma nodded, her gaze still fixed on the screen. "We've built the foundation. Now we need to build the future." The days that followed were filled with exploration, data collection, and experimentation. The crew's primary objective was to establish a basic habitat and begin testing the technologies that would allow them to survive on Mars long-term. There were numerous challenges to overcome: ensuring the sustainability of their life support systems, extracting water from the Martian soil, growing food in the harsh environment, and managing the psychological effects of isolation. But the crew was determined, and the world's eyes were on them. With each new discovery, the excitement grew. The first plant grew in Martian soil. The first sample of water was extracted from the planet's surface. The crew even managed to send the first transmission of Martian air back to Earth, thrilling scientists and engineers who had long dreamed of such a moment. But for all their achievements, the greatest challenge still lay ahead. How would humanity thrive on Mars? How could the colony expand, build, and sustain itself over the coming years? The mission's initial success was only the beginning of a long and difficult road. And so, as the crew prepared for their next phase of exploration, the world was already looking ahead, toward the future of Mars, and toward the next generation of pioneers who would continue the work that had begun with this historic landing. The first week on Mars had passed in a blur of activity. The crew had completed their initial tasks, setting up the habitat modules, conducting environmental surveys, and testing the vital systems that would sustain them during their stay. But despite the technical achievements, it was clear that the real work was only just beginning. The challenges of life on Mars were far greater than anything the crew had encountered on Earth, and every day brought new trials. The Martian landscape, while awe-inspiring, was unforgiving. The thin atmosphere and extreme temperatures made even the simplest tasks dangerous. The dust storms were unpredictable, and the lack of liquid water meant that every drop was precious. In the face of these obstacles, the crew had to rely on their training, their ingenuity, and each other. Captain Naomi Cole stood at the entrance of their habitat, staring out at the barren, red plains stretching into the distance. The view was surreal, like something out of a science fiction movie. Yet, this was real. This was their new home. "We've done it," Naomi said, her voice filled with awe. "We've made it to Mars. But now we have to survive here." Her words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the enormity of the task ahead. They had accomplished the impossible. Now it was time to make that achievement sustainable. For Naomi, it was a humbling realization. The success of the landing was just the beginning, but the real work, the daily grind of survival, had only just begun. Inside the habitat, the crew was gathered around a large table, discussing the next phase of their mission. The team was a mix of engineers, scientists, and medical professionals, each chosen for their expertise and adaptability. Naomi had handpicked them, knowing they would be the key to their success on Mars. Dr. Lisa Chen, the mission's medical officer, was the first to speak. "We need to begin long-term health assessments. The isolation, the low gravity, and the confined spaces are already taking a toll on us physically and mentally. We need to make sure we're all adjusting well to life on Mars." Dr. Chun had been monitoring the crew's health closely, performing daily checkups to track any changes in their physical or psychological well-being. The stress of being so far from home, the pressure of living in such an alien environment, was beginning to show. But there was little time to dwell on the mental strain. The crew had a job to do. "I agree," Naomi said, nodding. "But our priority right now has to be ensuring that we have a stable, reliable system for producing food and water. We can't survive on rations forever. We need to start growing food, and we need to start extracting water from the soil." The crew had brought along advanced technology to help with these challenges. The water extraction system, designed by SpaceX engineers, was capable of extracting water from the Martian soil, a critical resource for both drinking and growing crops. They had also brought specialized hydroponic units to begin growing the first plants on Mars, lettuce, radishes, and other vegetables that could thrive in the controlled environment of the habitat. But despite the advanced technology, it wasn't going to be easy. Every system had to be carefully calibrated and maintained. The crew was working long hours, troubleshooting and optimizing the equipment. Any mistake could lead to a potentially catastrophic failure. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Elon Musk and Emma were watching the updates from Mars with a mixture of pride and concern. Elon knew that this mission, while groundbreaking, was just the first step in a much larger project. Building a sustainable colony on Mars was going to take years, decades, even. But this was the foundation. "How's the team holding up?" Emma asked, her eyes scanning the live feed from Mars. "They're doing well," Elon replied. "They've overcome some of the early obstacles, but it's clear that the real test is ahead of them. The technology is working, but the human element is always the unpredictable factor. They have to adapt, and that's not something we can control from here." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I think they're ready. They have the willpower, the training, and the vision. It's not just about surviving on Mars, is it? It's about creating a new world." Elon smiled, the weight of the future settling on his shoulders. "Exactly. This is the beginning of something bigger than any of us. We're not just building a colony. We're laying the groundwork for humanity's future beyond Earth. For the first time, we're truly becoming a multi-planetary species." Back on Mars, Naomi and the crew faced their first real challenge. The water extraction system had malfunctioned. A critical component had failed, and they were unable to produce enough water to meet their needs. Without water, the survival of the mission was at risk. Naomi immediately called a team meeting. The tension in the air was palpable as the crew gathered around the table, each person aware of the gravity of the situation. "We need to fix this now," Naomi said, her voice firm. "We don't have the luxury of waiting for a replacement part from Earth. We need to figure this out ourselves." The crew was quick to act. Engineers and scientists worked together, diagnosing the problem and brainstorming possible solutions. Dr. Lisa Chen, the medical officer, was already preparing for the possibility that they might have to ration their water supply for a few days. "We can't afford to waste any water," Dr. Chen warned. "Even small amounts will be critical. Let's focus on hydration and avoid any unnecessary usage until we get this fixed." The next few days were a blur of technical troubleshooting, late-night shifts, and relentless teamwork. The crew worked in shifts to repair the malfunctioning water extraction system, pulling together every piece of knowledge they had accumulated during their training. It was a test of ingenuity and resilience. And then, just as hope was beginning to wane, they succeeded. The system was restored, and water began flowing once again. It wasn't a complete victory. It was just one small step in the greater battle for survival, but it was enough to remind them that they could overcome anything if they worked together. "Good job, everyone," Naomi said, her voice tired but triumphant. "We've taken the first step. Now let's keep moving forward." As the crew continued to work on their long-term survival strategies, they also began their first real exploration of the Martian surface. Armed with rovers, drones, and other advanced tools, they mapped the surrounding area, identifying potential sites for future habitats, research stations, and resource extraction. They had only scratched the surface of what Mars had to offer, but each new discovery was a step closer to making Mars a second home for humanity. Back on Earth, Elon and Emma were following every update closely. Emma couldn't help but feel a surge of pride as she watched the crew's progress. This was history in the making. They were witnessing the birth of a new world. But even as the crew made progress, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were just beginning to see the true challenges ahead. Mars might have been their first victory, but the real test would come when they had to establish a permanent, self-sustaining colony. The days blurred together in the cold, isolated world of Mars. The excitement of the initial landing had long passed, replaced by the gritty reality of survival. Every task was a challenge. Every decision carried weight. Yet, despite the mounting obstacles, there was an undeniable sense of purpose. This was the frontier of human civilization, and no matter how difficult the road ahead, the crew would persevere. It had been 2 weeks since the water extraction system failure, and while the situation had stabilized, new complications were beginning to emerge. The atmosphere on Mars was hostile, thin, composed mostly of carbon dioxide, and incapable of sustaining human life without the aid of advanced technology. The crew depended on their habitat's life support systems, but those systems required constant maintenance. That morning, as Naomi Cole sat in the control room, reviewing data on the habitat's oxygen generation system, a new problem emerged. One of the external sensors, critical for monitoring atmospheric conditions around the habitat, was malfunctioning. Without it, they could not accurately predict changes in the weather, including the potentially dangerous dust storms that could strike without warning. "Naomi, I've been monitoring the sensor. It's offline," reported Javier, the crew's lead engineer, his voice crackling through the comms. Naomi frowned. "What's the status on repairs?" "It's the wiring to the secondary module," Javier explained. "We can try to reroute the signal, but we need access to the external unit. The issue is the mounting system. It's going to be difficult in these conditions." She exhaled sharply, feeling the weight of the problem settle over her. Mars was a world of problems, each more complex than the last. "All right, let's get a team together. I'll go with you. We'll need to get it sorted before the next dust storm hits." The temperature on Mars hovered around -60°C, and the air was thin. Each breath felt like an effort, the weight of the helmet pressing on Naomi's head. The pressure of survival on Mars had a way of making everything feel more intense. As she suited up and made her way to the rover with Javier and Dr. Lisa Chun, the quiet of the planet was almost suffocating. Mars wasn't just a new world. It was an alien world, completely indifferent to humanity's presence. The rover sped across the barren landscape, its wheels crunching against the dusty terrain. In the distance, Naomi could see the towering, jagged peaks of a Martian mountain range. It was beautiful, but it also felt like a reminder of how small they were in the face of such an immense and uncaring planet. The sensor was mounted on a small structure a few hundred meters from their habitat. As they approached, Naomi's heart rate quickened. The wind was picking up, and the dust in the air was thickening. There was no sign of the storm yet, but it wouldn't be long before the winds would make the task nearly impossible. Javier, always the optimist, was already unstrapping his gear. "Let's get to work. We'll fix this before the storm hits, no problem." But Naomi knew better. Every plan on Mars had a way of turning more difficult than anticipated. She glanced at the sky, now tinged with an eerie orange hue. "We don't have much time." The next hour was a blur of activity. Naomi, Javier, and Dr. Chun worked together to detach the faulty sensor and begin rerouting its signal. Every movement was calculated. Every step was crucial. The last thing they needed was to be caught in a dust storm out here, miles from the safety of the habitat. It wasn't the cold or the thin air that made the task so difficult. It was the relentless unpredictability of the environment. Mars wasn't a world that allowed for mistakes. A single slip-up could result in a life-threatening emergency. "Got it," Javier said after what felt like an eternity. He stood back from the sensor, his face hidden behind the visor, but Naomi could see the satisfaction in his posture. The signal's back online. For a moment, there was a rush of relief. But that feeling was short-lived. A low rumble echoed in the distance, like thunder, though Naomi knew better than to expect rain on Mars. Instead, it was the warning sign of an impending dust storm. The wind picked up, carrying with it a cloud of fine, red dust that obscured their view of the surrounding landscape. "It's coming faster than I expected," Naomi muttered, glancing over her shoulder. The storm was closing in rapidly. The skies had shifted from an eerie orange to a dense, angry gray. "We need to get back to the rover now," Dr. Chin urged, her voice tense. The crew rushed to the rover, clambering inside just as the first gusts of wind hit. The dust storm was upon them in seconds, a thick, suffocating cloud that blotted out the sky and reduced visibility to mere inches. The rover's engines roared as Javier floored the gas pedal, attempting to navigate through the storm. But the wind was fierce, pushing the rover off course. Naomi could feel her heartbeat thundering in her chest as the vehicle lurched, fighting against the storm. The dust scraped against the rover's windows, a constant hiss of particles like sandpaper. "We're not going to make it back in time," Naomi muttered, her mind racing. There was no way they could get to the habitat before the storm fully enveloped them. The storm intensified, and the rover began to slide sideways, as if it might tip over at any moment. Naomi's heart pounded as she gripped her seat, the tension building with every second. Outside, the Martian wind howled, and the landscape disappeared into an impenetrable wall of dust. "We need to find shelter," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Now." Javier's hands flew across the controls. "There's a cave about 500 meters ahead. I think we can make it there." The next few minutes felt like an eternity. Every bump and jolt from the storm seemed to stretch time, as if Mars itself was trying to throw them off course. But they didn't have a choice. If they didn't make it to the cave, they would be exposed to the elements, unable to breathe, unable to survive. Javier's hands were steady as he steered the rover toward the cave, and soon they saw the opening ahead. With a final push, they slid the rover into the relative safety of the cave. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. The dust storm raged outside, but inside the cave, they could breathe. The crew quickly disembarked from the rover, taking shelter from the storm. Naomi watched the storm's fury through the narrow opening of the cave. The world outside had disappeared entirely, swallowed by the Martian dust. Inside the cave, the crew took stock of their situation. They had shelter, but they were stranded. There was no telling how long the storm would last, and they couldn't risk heading back to the habitat until it cleared. Naomi sat on the rocky ground, feeling the weight of the situation settle on her. They had come so far, survived so many challenges, But Mars was a harsh, unforgiving world. There was no room for complacency. The storm had proven that. "We're going to have to ride this out," Naomi said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty. "We wait for the storm to pass. Stay calm, stay focused. We'll get back when it's safe." As the storm raged on outside, the crew settled into the cave, taking inventory of their supplies and preparing for an extended stay. The situation wasn't ideal, but Naomi knew they would get through it. They had come this far, and they wouldn't let a storm stop them. The hours passed slowly as the crew sat in the cave, the storm outside howling like a wild beast, its fury relentless. Inside, the air felt thick with tension. The cave, though a temporary refuge, was small and cramped. The cold seeped through the walls, and the hum of the life support systems barely cut through the ever-present roar of the Martian wind. Naomi sat quietly, monitoring the storm's progression through the rover's sensors. The dust cloud was dense, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Outside, the winds howled with a ferocity that would have been terrifying to anyone who hadn't spent months training for this exact kind of situation. But even for experienced astronauts, there was something eerie about the way the storm seemed to consume everything in its path. "We can't stay in here forever," Dr. Chun said after a long silence, her voice tight with frustration. "This cave is a temporary fix, not a permanent solution." Naomi nodded, but didn't reply right away. It was clear they couldn't stay holed up in the cave indefinitely. Resources were limited, and the longer they stayed here, the more their chances of survival would dwindle. But they had no choice. The storm had trapped them. "How long do you think it will last?" Javier asked, his face hidden behind the visor of his helmet. "It could be hours, even days," Naomi replied, her eyes scanning the storm data. "We can't predict how long it will go on, but we need to stay put until it clears. Venturing out in this will only make things worse." The tension in the cave was palpable. Everyone had their own way of coping. Javier, the pragmatic engineer, was already checking the rover systems and making sure their backup supplies were secured. Dr. Chun, the medical officer, was quietly taking inventory of their food and water. She was meticulous, calm under pressure, but Naomi could see the strain in her eyes. Even the most experienced professionals could only handle so much isolation before the mental weight of the situation started to break through. As the storm raged on, Naomi found herself lost in thought. She stared at the rough, reddish-brown cave walls, feeling the gravity of their situation settle in. This was Mars, an unforgiving, harsh planet, and they were at its mercy. For a moment, the enormity of their mission hit her with a sudden force. They weren't just surviving. They were pioneers. They were the first humans to take this step, to make the journey to another world. But now, they had to survive it. They had to conquer it. But would they? The self-doubt was a sharp sting. She had prepared for this mission for years, decades of research, months of training. But nothing could prepare her for the raw, unyielding power of Mars. It was a planet that didn't care who you were or what you had done before. All it demanded was that you adapt or die. Javier interrupted her thoughts, his voice breaking through the tension. "Naomi, the rover's fine, but I think we should consider getting out of here as soon as the storm breaks. We can't risk running out of supplies." "I know," Naomi replied, her voice steady despite the turbulence in her mind. "We'll head back as soon as it's safe." Hours slipped by, the storm's intensity waxing and waning like some ancient beast testing its prey. The crew had settled into a sort of uneasy routine. They ate rations, checked their equipment, and exchanged sparse words. There was little to say. The uncertainty of the situation hung over them all like a dark cloud. But as time wore on, the reality of their isolation began to gnaw at them. Each hour felt longer than the last. Even Naomi, the seasoned leader, felt the weight of the loneliness pressing in. She glanced at her team, Javier, Dr. Chun, and the others, and could see the same weariness in their eyes. Dr. Chun was the first to break the silence. "We need to talk about our next steps. We can't keep waiting forever." Naomi nodded. "We wait until the storm clears. Then, we head back to the habitat. We'll need to check our fuel reserves and double-check the habitat systems to make sure everything is stable. If we need to conserve resources, we'll do it. We have enough for now, but we have to be prepared. Another few hours passed, and the storm showed no sign of abating. The crew tried to keep their minds occupied with small tasks, reorganizing supplies, doing maintenance checks on their gear. But the storm remained constant, a reminder of the unpredictability they faced. Then, at some point, Naomi noticed something. There was a subtle change in the air. The winds had dropped in intensity, and the storm's howl was beginning to die down. The dust had settled into an eerie stillness, a silence that was almost as unnerving as the storm itself. Javier, always alert, was the first to notice it too. He walked over to Naomi and tapped her on the shoulder. "The storm's breaking. We can move." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She had been waiting for this moment, the chance to make it back to safety. But now that the time had come, she felt a sudden wave of apprehension. The storm had kept them confined for so long, and in a way, she'd grown used to the cave. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face Mars again, but she had no choice. "We move now," Naomi said, her voice firm. "Everyone suit up. We're heading back to the habitat." The crew wasted no time. The storm had cleared enough to allow for visibility, and the rover was ready. They donned their suits, checked their gear, and climbed back into the rover, bracing for the trek back to the habitat. As they navigated through the Martian landscape, Naomi's mind was focused on one thing: survival. They had made it through the worst of the storm, but Mars was full of surprises. There was still so much they didn't understand about the planet, and they couldn't afford to let their guard down. But as the rover sped across the dusty plains, Naomi couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of relief. They had faced the heart of the storm and come out on the other side. That, at least, was a victory. The return trip to the habitat was long and slow, but the storm had passed, and they were able to make steady progress. The landscape, though desolate, was now eerily calm. The red dust settled like a blanket, and the wind had quieted to a faint whisper. In the distance, the habitat loomed, a small oasis of safety in a vast and hostile world. As they neared the habitat, Naomi felt a surge of emotion. They had made it through the storm. They had survived, and they were one step closer to the dream they had all shared, making Mars a second home for humanity. When they finally reached the habitat, the crew climbed out of the rover, exhausted but relieved. They had survived the storm, and Mars had shown them, once again, just how fragile their existence could be. As Naomi stood outside the habitat, looking out at the Martian landscape, she felt something new, something she hadn't expected. A sense of awe. This planet, despite its dangers, held untold possibilities. Mars wasn't just a place to survive. It was a place to explore, to grow, and to build a future. "We're not just here to survive," Naomi said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're here to thrive." The crew has survived a brutal dust storm and made it back to the safety of their habitat. What do you think the crew will face next on Mars? Will the challenges continue to grow, or will they finally find a way to stabilize their life on the red planet? Share your thoughts and predictions in the comments. Back at the habitat, the crew gathered in the central hub, still in their suits, their bodies stiff and exhausted from the journey back. The storm had tested them, but they were safe, for now. Naomi felt the weight of their survival pressing on her. It wasn't over. Not yet. "Let's do a systems check," Naomi ordered, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "First things first. We need to make sure everything is functioning as it should." Javier nodded, already moving to the control panels. His fingers flew across the console, checking everything from power reserves to water systems. Dr. Chun moved toward the medical station, her eyes scanning the crew for signs of fatigue or stress that might need immediate attention. The mental strain of being stranded in a cave, cut off from their home, was as real as the physical challenges they faced. "Naomi, the external sensors are picking up a drop in atmospheric pressure," Javier said, his voice tense. "Something's off with the habitat seal. I'll need to take a look." Naomi's heart sank. After everything they had just gone through, the last thing they needed was another complication. "Do what you can, but don't take unnecessary risks," she warned. "We're not out of the woods yet." Javier worked quickly, pulling up schematics of the habitat's outer shell. The problem with the atmospheric seal wasn't immediately obvious. Mars, with its thin atmosphere and constant temperature fluctuations, was tough on any structure built to sustain human life. The habitat had been constructed with the best materials available, but there were still weaknesses. Every system on Mars had a limit. As Javier examined the habitat's external integrity, Naomi walked over to Dr. Chun, who was now checking their food supply. "We'll need to ration more carefully," Dr. Chun said softly. "We're burning through more oxygen than we anticipated. If this continues, we might not have enough to last us through the next phase of the mission." Naomi's stomach clenched. They had enough supplies, but if something went wrong, if they couldn't fix the seal or if another storm hit, it could change everything. Mars wasn't a forgiving planet. There was no margin for error, no room for failure. The hours dragged on as the crew worked in relative silence. The storm's fury had passed, but the consequences lingered. They were tired, physically and mentally drained from the ordeal. Even with the system's checks in place and the external seal repair underway, Naomi knew this wasn't the end of the challenges they would face. Javier finally returned to the central hub, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's fixed," he said, though his voice was laced with exhaustion. "The seal on the outer wall was partially compromised. I patched it up, but it's only a temporary fix. We'll need to do a full inspection later to ensure it doesn't happen again." Naomi exhaled. "Good work, but I agree. We need to stay vigilant. This is just the beginning." Later that evening, after the team had eaten and rested as best they could, Naomi sat alone in the control room. The hum of the life support systems was the only sound in the otherwise still habitat. The small, flickering screens offered a semblance of normalcy, but Naomi's mind kept returning to the same question. What's next? They had survived the storm. They had repaired the habitat seal. But Mars was an unknown force. Every victory seemed to come with a new challenge just around the corner. And as much as she tried to focus on the tasks at hand, Naomi couldn't shake the sense of impending danger that loomed on the horizon. She ran a hand through her hair and checked the communications panel again. No new messages from Earth. Silence. Just the waiting. They had been alone for so long that it was starting to feel like they always would be. The distance between them and home was growing, both physically and emotionally. The next morning, the crew met for their daily briefing. Their mission was to ensure the long-term sustainability of life on Mars. That meant focusing on power, water, oxygen, everything needed to survive on this barren planet. But there was something else that had been gnawing at Naomi for days. The unknown. "All right," Naomi began, her voice steady. "We've faced a lot over the last couple of weeks. But we're not just surviving anymore. We're building. Mars isn't just a challenge. It's an opportunity. So let's talk about what we need to do next." She looked at each member of the team. Javier, the pragmatic engineer, Dr. Chun, the comm medical officer. They were all committed, but Naomi knew they were tired. The isolation was beginning to weigh on everyone. "We need to get the greenhouse running," Naomi continued. "We're running low on fresh food, and the supplies from Earth won't last forever. Our best bet is to get some kind of crop growing. That will give us a buffer." Javier raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting we start farming on Mars?" Naomi nodded. "Yes. It's not going to be easy, but we have to start now. We can't afford to wait until we're in a crisis. If we can get plants growing, we won't just survive. We'll start to build a future here." The crew got to work immediately. The greenhouse was one of the habitat's most crucial features. It was designed to provide food, oxygen, and a small measure of normalcy in the otherwise hostile environment. The problem was that it had never been tested under real Martian conditions before. No one knew exactly how it would perform. Javier and Dr. Chan worked together to ensure the temperature controls were properly calibrated. Naomi oversaw the planting process, carefully selecting the seeds they had brought from Earth. There was a lot of uncertainty in the air, but Naomi remained focused. The greenhouse could be their lifeline. As the first seeds were planted in the Martian soil, Naomi couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. It was a small thing, but in a place like Mars, every victory mattered. They weren't just surviving, they were fighting for a future. Later that day, Naomi received a brief message from Earth. The transmission was short, but it carried a weight of significance. They'd been waiting for any kind of communication for days, and even though the message wasn't anything new, It was a reminder that they weren't entirely alone. "How's the mission progressing?" the message read. "We're proud of all of you. Keep pushing forward. Earth is watching." Naomi's fingers hovered over the keyboard as she typed a quick response. "We're making progress. Mars is as challenging as we expected, but we're ready. We'll keep pushing forward." She paused before hitting send, wondering if her words would be enough. Would they be able to continue? Would they be able to thrive here, on this lonely, barren world? Mars was relentless, but they were human, and humans had always found a way to survive. As the sun set over the Martian horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape, Naomi stood in front of the greenhouse, staring at the small patches of soil where the seeds had been planted. The work wasn't over, and the challenges would continue. But for the first time in days, she felt a sense of calm. Mars was still a world of danger, but it was also a world of possibility, and they were here to unlock it. The crew is starting their first attempt at farming on Mars, but the challenges are far from over. Do you think they'll succeed in growing food on Mars? What obstacles do you think they'll face next in their journey? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The days following their decision to start the greenhouse project felt both longer and shorter than expected. Naomi couldn't shake the sense that the stakes had grown higher than ever. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to thrive, to build something on Mars that could eventually sustain not only them but future generations. And yet, the weight of their isolation, the sheer scale of their challenge, was always there, hovering in the background. As the crew worked tirelessly on the greenhouse, Naomi spent more time observing the planet's barren landscape outside, lost in thought. Mars was cold, unforgiving, and wild. But it was also strangely beautiful. The sunsets, streaked in reds and golds, never failed to awe her. The dust storms had passed, but the silence of the planet was louder than ever. It was a silence that felt like a reminder. Mars was in charge here, not them. Inside the habitat, Javier and Dr. Chun were focused on the greenhouse. The temperature systems, which they had calibrated meticulously, had begun to stabilize. The lights overhead hummed softly, simulating a day-night cycle, and the small patches of soil were slowly being prepped for planting. For Naomi, this was their first step toward building a future, but it felt fragile. "Naomi, the temperature is holding steady," Javier reported as he surveyed the greenhouse's environmental control system. "But I'd feel better if we had another backup system for heat just in case." "I agree," Naomi said, her voice tight with concern. "It's critical we get this right. If the crops fail, we'll be in real trouble. Let's make sure we have everything ready before we start planting." Dr. Chin, meanwhile, was working on something else entirely: the psychological health of the crew. After everything they had endured, months of training, the journey to Mars, and now this storm, it was starting to take a toll. Naomi had seen the signs in Dr. Chin's eyes during their briefings. The isolation, the stress of being so far from Earth. It wasn't just physically draining, it was beginning to erode the crew's mental fortitude. "Naomi, I've noticed some fatigue among the crew. It's not just physical, there's an emotional toll here. I can't quantify it, but it's there. The isolation is starting to affect them," Dr. Chun said one evening as they sat together, discussing the crew's well-being. "I know. I can see it too," Naomi replied. "But what choice do we have? We push forward. We have to keep building, or we'll lose everything." Dr. Chen sighed, but her expression softened. "Just make sure we take care of each other. Mars will break us if we're not careful. And it won't be the storms, or the cold, or the distance. It'll be the loneliness." In the days that followed, Naomi focused on keeping the crew grounded. They couldn't afford to break. Every task was essential: checking the water supply, calibrating life support systems, keeping the communications equipment running. But Naomi knew that it was just as important to keep morale high. A positive mindset could make the difference between failure and success. She began to implement small changes, like dedicating an hour every day to leisure time, where the crew could relax, talk, play games, or even exercise. Anything to keep them connected, to keep them feeling human. As the first seeds were planted, Naomi felt a sense of accomplishment, however small it was. Every new root that pushed through the soil was a victory, a sign that they were not just surviving, but adapting to Mars. Days turned into weeks. The seeds had sprouted slowly, but steadily. The plants, though fragile, were beginning to show signs of life. The smell of fresh growth, albeit faint, was a welcome reprieve in the sterile, recycled air of the habitat. Even the slightest hint of green was enough to bring hope to the crew. But with hope came new challenges. Mars, as always, had a way of throwing the unexpected into the mix. One morning, Naomi was roused from a restless sleep by an alarm blaring through the habitat. She shot out of bed, her heart racing. "What's going on?" she asked as she strapped on her boots, already pulling on her jacket. Javier's voice crackled over the comms. "Naomi, it's the greenhouse. The temperature systems are fluctuating. It's down to freezing, and the plants might not survive. Can you fix it?" Naomi barked as she rushed to the control room. "I'm on it," Javier replied. "But it's not just the greenhouse. There's a pressure drop in the entire habitat. Something's not right." Naomi's stomach clenched. "Keep me updated. I'll check on the crew." The next hour was a blur of frantic movements and tense calculations. Naomi found Dr. Chen tending to the plants in the greenhouse, her hands moving with quick precision as she adjusted the heating units. "Dr. Chen," Naomi called as she entered. "Is everything all right in here?" "The temperature's stabilizing," Dr. Chen replied, though her face was pale with worry. "But I'm not sure how long we can keep it under control. If something's happening to the habitat, we might lose everything we've worked for." Naomi turned to the systems console and tapped in the diagnostic codes. "What's causing this?" she muttered under her breath. Back in the control room, Javier was working quickly, his face tense as he examined the pressure readings. "The habitat's main compressor is malfunctioning," he said. "We've lost some of the internal pressure. If we don't fix it soon, the whole habitat could begin to destabilize." Naomi's heart pounded in her chest. "Is there any way to bypass it?" Javier hesitated for a moment. "I can try a workaround, but it's risky. If I don't get it right, the pressure could drop even further." "Do it," Naomi said, her voice hard with resolve. "We don't have any other choice." The next several hours were a blur of technical jargon, hasty repairs, and careful monitoring. With every passing moment, the stakes grew higher. The crew was exhausted, but there was no room for hesitation. They were all in this together. If they failed, everything they had worked for, every seed, every inch of progress, would be lost. By the time the temperature in the greenhouse stabilized, the pressure had also returned to normal levels. They had done it. The immediate crisis had passed. But Naomi knew this was just a temporary reprieve. Mars had a way of testing them, and it would continue to do so. That night, as the crew gathered around a small table in the central hub, they shared a quiet meal. It wasn't much, just nutrient-rich rations and rehydrated vegetables, but it felt like a feast in the wake of the day's events. "We pulled through," Naomi said, looking at each of the crew members. "We're still here. We're still alive. And we'll keep going, no matter what Mars throws at us." Javier nodded, but there was a glint of something else in his eyes. "Mars will keep throwing things at us," he said, "but we'll keep fighting back." Naomi smiled. "Exactly." As they finished eating, Naomi stood up, looking out at the dark Martian landscape through the small porthole window. The stars were bright against the black void of space, and for a moment, everything felt still, silent. She thought of Earth, of the people they had left behind, of the future they were building. Mars was an unforgiving world, but they were here to make it their own. Mars, for all its barren beauty, was a constant source of tension. Every moment the crew spent on the planet felt like a battle with time, with resources, with their own limitations. And with every victory, like the greenhouse revival or the atmospheric repair, a new challenge would surface. It was as if the planet itself was constantly reminding them that it held all the power, and they were simply visitors. It had been several days since the pressure drop in the habitat, and the team had settled back into a tentative rhythm. The crops in the greenhouse were slowly growing, though they were still far from a reliable food source. The systems were running more smoothly, but there was an undercurrent of unease that Naomi couldn't shake. Something was out of balance. That morning, Naomi gathered the crew for their daily briefing. As always, she started with the status report. "We've made progress with the crops," she began, looking around at each crew member. They're small, but they're alive. That's a good sign. We've also stabilized the habitat's pressure systems, so for now, we're in the clear. Javier nodded, his eyes focused but tired. I've done a full systems check, and everything looks solid. We've got a good buffer for the next few weeks. But we still need to keep an eye on things. These systems can only take so much stress. Naomi's eyes flicked to Dr. Chun, who was seated quietly at the table. Her expression was thoughtful, almost distant. Naomi had noticed it before, the subtle signs of anxiety creeping in. Dr. Chun had always been the calm one, but the long isolation was beginning to show its cracks. How's the crew holding up, Dr. Chun? Naomi asked, her voice gentle. Dr. Chun hesitated before answering. They're coping, but it's hard. The isolation is wearing on all of us. It's not just the physical exhaustion. It's the psychological toll. I can't quantify it, but there's a sense of dread hanging in the air. Something feels off. Naomi studied her for a moment, sensing the depth of Dr. Chin's concern. She hadn't been the only one to feel it. A few times, she had caught herself staring at the walls of the habitat, wondering if the pressure wasn't just inside the walls, but inside them too. But they had no choice. They had to keep moving forward. Mars didn't wait for anyone. Later that day, as Naomi checked the greenhouse, something unusual caught her eye. One of the plants, a small vine of Martian potatoes, was wilting. It wasn't the cold. The temperature controls were working fine. It wasn't the water supply. Everything seemed to be within normal parameters. She knelt down, inspecting the plant closely. There were no signs of disease, no pests, nothing that would explain its sudden deterioration. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. Could something else be affecting them? Perhaps the soil composition wasn't as stable as they thought. Or maybe Mars had other, more subtle ways of testing them. Javier, Naomi called over the comms, her voice tight with worry. I need you to come to the greenhouse. Something's wrong with the plants. Within minutes, Javier arrived, his boots clanking against the metal floor as he made his way to Naomi's side. What's going on? Naomi pointed to the wilting plant. Look at this. Everything else seems fine, but this one's dying. Javier crouched down, inspecting the plant carefully. It doesn't make sense, he muttered. I've checked the soil composition. We're using the right balance of nutrients. It could be an anomaly, or there's something else going on. Something else? Naomi asked, her voice sharp. Javier looked up at her, his expression grave. Mars isn't Earth. Even though we've done everything by the book, there's still so much we don't understand about this planet. We could be facing conditions that we're not even aware of yet. The rest of the day passed in a quiet, uneasy tension. The team tried to go about their tasks as usual, but Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just the plant. It was everything. The pressure drop, the strange malfunctioning systems, the subtle signs of stress among the crew. There was something more at play. That night, as Naomi lay in her bunk, she replayed the events of the day in her mind. She thought of Dr. Chin's unease, Javier's warning, the plants in the greenhouse. And then, just as she was about to fall asleep, the ground beneath her shifted. The next morning, Naomi awoke to the sound of alarms. Not the usual warning chimes for routine checks. These were different. The red emergency lights flashed overhead, casting an eerie glow over the habitat. Her heart raced as she scrambled to her feet, throwing on her suit and running to the control room. Naomi, we've got a problem. Javier's voice crackled over the comms as soon as she reached the control panel. The seismic sensors just picked up something big. A tremor. It's not an earthquake. It's too short. But whatever it is, it's shaking the ground underneath us. Naomi froze, the weight of his words sinking in. A tremor? On Mars? She had read about seismic activity on the planet, but it had always seemed like a distant, theoretical risk. They were in a stable zone. Or so they thought. How bad is it? Naomi asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We're not sure yet. The habitat's holding up for now, but we're getting additional readings that suggest there may be more coming. The entire area around us could be unstable. Naomi's mind raced. A tremor on Mars was a sign that something major was happening beneath the surface. Was it a natural phenomenon? Or was it something else? Javier, Check the greenhouse. Make sure everything is secure, Naomi ordered. Her voice steady despite the panic she felt rising inside. Dr. Chun, I need a full assessment of the crew. We need to make sure everyone is okay. She turned back to the console, scanning the data. It was the unknowns that terrified her the most, the things they couldn't control. The planet itself was an enigma, and this tremor might be only the beginning. Javier arrived at the greenhouse a few minutes later, his face pale. Naomi, we have a problem, he said urgently. The tremor caused a partial collapse of one of the walls. The plants they've been damaged. The soil shifted, and some of the irrigation lines have ruptured. Can we fix it? Naomi asked, her voice sharp. I'm on it, Javier replied quickly, but Naomi could tell from the look in his eyes that it wouldn't be easy. The damage was severe. There was no guarantee they could recover the crops. Meanwhile, Dr. Chun had been checking on the crew. She met Naomi in the hallway, her face etched with concern. Everyone's accounted for, but the stress is starting to show. If we face another tremor, the crew's going to break. Naomi nodded grimly. We can't afford another one. We need to figure out what's going on. As the day wore on, the crew worked together to stabilize the habitat. Javier and Naomi worked on the greenhouse repairs while Dr. Chin helped monitor the crew's mental state. It was clear that the tremor had shaken more than just the habitat. It had rattled everyone's resolve. Later that evening, as Naomi sat alone in the control room, watching the Martian night unfold outside, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being tested. Mars was relentless. But now, it felt like something more than just the natural dangers of the planet. The tremor, the plant failure, the psychological strain on the crew, it all pointed to something deeper. Mars wasn't just testing their ability to survive. It was challenging their very will to continue. And Naomi knew that the worst was yet to come. The days after the tremor passed were tense. The crew worked tirelessly to repair the greenhouse, the habitat, and the damaged systems. But the strain was beginning to show. It wasn't just the physical damage they were dealing with. It was the growing realization that Mars, the planet they had chosen to conquer, was now beginning to fight back in ways they hadn't anticipated. Every repair felt like a temporary fix, and every success brought with it a gnawing fear of what might come next. Naomi couldn't help but feel a shift in the air. The tremor, which had felt like a natural anomaly, now seemed like a warning, a reminder that they were not masters of this planet. Mars was old, ancient even, and its secrets were buried deep within its crust. The crew had only scratched the surface, and Naomi feared they might have stirred something they weren't prepared for. It had been 3 days since the tremor, and the crew had managed to stabilize the habitat and the greenhouse. The crops had suffered damage, but the team had been able to salvage some, and with the repairs in place, things were slowly returning to normal. Yet Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that something more was coming, something bigger. That evening, as she sat in her quarters, scrolling through the status updates on her tablet, she was interrupted by a message. It was a short, cryptic note from Dr. Chun. Naomi, we need to talk. Naomi's pulse quickened. It wasn't unusual for Dr. Chun to reach out, but the tone of the message was different. Something was off. Naomi immediately sent a reply. What's going on? A few moments later, Dr. Chin's voice came through the comms. Meet me in the observation room. It's urgent. The observation room was one of Naomi's favorite spots on the habitat. The large, curved window offered a panoramic view of the Martian landscape, the barren red plains stretching out beneath a star-filled sky. The stillness of the place always gave her a sense of calm, but tonight, there was a different energy in the air. As she entered, she found Dr. Chin standing by the window, staring out at the distant horizon. Naomi could sense her unease before she even spoke. What's happened? Naomi asked, her voice low. Dr. Chin turned to face her, her expression unreadable. I've been reviewing the data, she said slowly. The tremor we felt a few days ago wasn't an isolated event. It wasn't just a random seismic shift. Naomi's stomach churned. What do you mean? Are we facing more instability? Not just that, Dr. Chun said, her voice barely a whisper. I believe we've triggered something beneath the surface. There are subtle seismic readings now, small shifts, but they're increasing in frequency. I think Mars is waking up. Naomi felt a cold wave of dread wash over her. Waking up? She echoed. What does that mean? I'm not sure, Dr. Chin admitted, but I've been reading about Mars's geology, and there's evidence of ancient volcanic activity. The planet's crust is far from stable. If there's something beneath the surface, something dormant, it might be stirring. We could be facing more frequent tremors, maybe even eruptions. We don't know what the risks are, but I'm starting to fear that our presence here is triggering something we don't understand. Naomi stood frozen for a moment, processing Dr. Chin's words. Mars had always been an enigma. Its geology was radically different from Earth's, and while there had been some research into the planet's seismic history, no one had expected it to pose such an immediate threat. They had come to Mars to push the boundaries of human exploration, but now it seemed like the planet was pushing back. We need to alert the crew, Naomi said after a long pause. If there's a risk of more tremors, we need to be prepared. We can't let this catch us off guard. Dr. Chen nodded, but her expression was troubled. I'm worried that the damage we've already sustained, especially in the greenhouse, might be worse than we think. The soil is already destabilizing, and if Mars does experience more seismic activity, it could affect our entire operation. Naomi felt a pit in her stomach. We've got to secure everything. We can't afford to lose the crops, not now. And the habitat, it's barely holding together as it is. The rest of the night was spent in a flurry of activity. Naomi called an emergency crew meeting, and everyone gathered in the central hub to discuss the situation. Javier, Dr. Chun, and the rest of the team listened intently as Naomi outlined the new threat. There was no denying that their situation was becoming more precarious by the hour. We've got to focus on shoring up our infrastructure, Naomi said, pacing in front of the crew. The greenhouse needs to be reinforced, and we have to make sure the habitat can withstand any more seismic events. I don't care if we have to pull every resource we've got. We need to make this a priority. Javier, who had been working nonstop on repairs, rubbed his face in exhaustion. We've already done everything we can to reinforce the habitat. If Mars decides to throw something big at us, I don't know how much longer we'll last. We'll find a way, Naomi replied firmly. We have no other choice. We're not giving up now. The next few days were filled with relentless work. The crew had a renewed sense of urgency, and everyone did their part, reinforcing walls, securing the greenhouse, and monitoring the seismic data. Yet, despite their best efforts, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that they were fighting an invisible enemy. Every small tremor that rattled through the habitat sent a ripple of anxiety through the crew. Each time the ground shifted, Naomi's heart skipped a beat. The uncertainty was unbearable. It was as if the planet was holding its breath, waiting to see what they would do next. It was on the 5th day after Dr. Chin's warning that Naomi's worst fears were realized. Another tremor, stronger this time, shook the habitat. The alarms blared, and Naomi bolted upright in bed, her pulse racing. She threw on her suit and rushed to the control room, where Javier was already working furiously to stabilize the systems. We're losing pressure, Javier shouted as Naomi entered. The quake's destabilizing the habitat. I need more time. Naomi looked at the monitors. The pressure in the habitat was dropping rapidly, and the systems were failing faster than they could be repaired. She knew they didn't have long before the situation became critical. Shut down non-essential systems, Naomi ordered. Focus everything on stabilizing the habitat. We can't afford to lose any more. But even as she spoke, the ground shook again. A deeper, more rumbling tremor that rattled the walls and set off more alarms. Naomi could feel the cold grip of panic creeping in, but she forced herself to stay focused. This was no longer just about survival. It was about protecting the people she cared about, the dream they had built on this alien world. Minutes stretched into hours as the crew worked to stabilize the habitat, each tremor growing stronger than the last. The ground beneath them was no longer just a foundation. It was a reminder that Mars was alive in ways they couldn't control, and that it could, at any moment, turn on them. Naomi looked out the observation window once again, her eyes searching the Martian horizon. The stars were still there, untouched. But Mars was different now. It wasn't just a planet to be conquered. It was a living, breathing entity, and it was beginning to fight back. And Naomi, along with the rest of the crew, had no choice but to fight back, too. The tremors had come in waves, each one more intense than the last. The crew had managed to stabilize the habitat after the latest quake, but the situation was becoming increasingly dire. Mars, it seemed, had never been truly quiet, and now it was showing its power in ways that no one could have predicted. Naomi was beginning to realize that the seismic activity wasn't just a random occurrence. It was part of something much larger, something they had yet to fully understand. The day after the latest tremor, Naomi called a crew-wide meeting to discuss their next steps. They couldn't afford to remain reactive. They needed to take proactive measures if they were going to survive the increasing seismic instability. As the crew gathered around the central table, the tension in the room was palpable. Everyone looked exhausted, but there was no time to rest. The planet had a way of making its demands clear. "We need to start considering long-term solutions," Naomi said, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling in her mind. "The tremors are only going to increase, and we don't know what kind of seismic shifts we'll be dealing with next. Our systems are holding for now, but there's a limit to how much we can withstand." Javier, who had been working nonstop to reinforce the habitat's structural integrity, rubbed his eyes. "We've already reinforced everything we can. But if Mars keeps shaking like this, it's only a matter of time before something gives. We need a better solution." "I've been reviewing the geological data," Dr. Chen spoke up, her voice laced with concern. "Mars has a history of seismic activity. This isn't the first time the planet has experienced tremors. But the frequency and intensity we're seeing now is unusual. Something has changed, and I'm worried that we might be facing something more catastrophic." Naomi turned to her, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean, catastrophic?" Dr. Chan hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Mars has dormant volcanoes. Some of them have been inactive for millennia, but there's a chance, though it's still unconfirmed, that some of them could be waking up. If that happens, we could be dealing with eruptions, lava flows, and extreme seismic instability that could wipe out everything we've built." A chill ran through Naomi. They had been aware of Mars's volcanic history, but the idea that an eruption might be on the horizon felt like a nightmare. She had read about Mars's volcanoes before, massive formations like Olympus Mons, the tallest volcano in the solar system. But those were distant, theoretical threats. Now, it felt as though they were all too real. "How likely is it?" Naomi asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Dr. Chen paused again, her eyes locked on the monitor in front of her. "The data is inconclusive, but the tremors, these aren't typical aftershocks. They're coming from deep within the crust, not just from the surface. We may have triggered something, or there might be an event brewing beneath us. If Mars's internal pressure continues to build, we could be looking at a significant volcanic event. And when it happens, we'll have no warning." The gravity of Dr. Chen's words hit Naomi hard. They had been prepared for some level of hardship on Mars: resource scarcity, isolation, the challenges of survival. But volcanic eruptions? Lava flows? The idea of the planet turning into a hostile, fiery landscape was a nightmare they hadn't anticipated. "Then we need to leave," Javier said bluntly, his face pale. "If there's a real risk of an eruption, we can't stay here. We need to evacuate." Naomi shook her head. "We don't have that option. Not yet. We've invested too much into this mission. The Mars colony is our future. If we leave now, we're not just abandoning the mission. We're abandoning the dream of colonizing this planet. We have to find a way to survive." Javier looked at her with disbelief. "You're asking us to stay, even if we're facing a volcanic disaster? That's suicide." "I'm not asking you to stay and do nothing," Naomi replied, her voice sharp. "I'm asking you to help me find a way to prepare. If we evacuate, we give up. And I'm not ready to give up on Mars, not yet." The crew fell silent, the weight of Naomi's words sinking in. They all understood the stakes. They had all signed up for this mission knowing the risks. But none of them had expected this. Mars was a world of uncharted dangers, and now they were learning just how little they truly knew about the planet. Over the next few days, the crew doubled down on their efforts to prepare. They reinforced the habitat even further, strengthening the walls, the airlocks, and the structural supports. They began creating evacuation plans, mapping out potential safe zones, and ensuring that their limited resources were as secure as possible. But the reality was harsh. If Mars did indeed experience an eruption, their best efforts might not be enough. In addition to the physical preparations, Naomi spent hours in the command center, studying the data Dr. Chun had compiled. The seismic readings were growing more erratic, and there were signs of increased activity deep beneath the planet's surface. Naomi had always known that Mars was an unpredictable world, but now it felt like something was stirring, something ancient and dangerous. One evening, as Naomi sat in her quarters, reviewing the latest reports, she felt the ground shift beneath her. It was a tremor, but this one was different. It was longer, more intense. The lights flickered, and for a moment, Naomi thought she might lose power entirely. The air pressure dropped, just for a moment, before the emergency systems kicked in. She grabbed the comms. "Javier, report. What's happening?" "We've got a big one," came his voice strained. "The tremors hit the power grid. We've lost a few systems. The habitat's still holding for now, but it's not good. This is stronger than anything we've felt before." Naomi's heart raced. This was it. This was the one they had feared. She scrambled to the control room, her thoughts a blur. The crew was already moving, trying to secure everything they could, but there was no way to predict what would come next. When Naomi arrived in the control room, the situation was worse than she had imagined. The tremor had triggered a cascade of failures across the habitat. Life support systems were flickering, the communications network was down, and the main power grid was dangerously unstable. The emergency lights illuminated the room in an eerie red glow, casting long shadows across the walls. Javier was already at the console, his fingers flying over the controls, trying to stabilize the systems. Dr. Chun was nearby, monitoring the crew's health and trying to calm the growing panic. Naomi took a deep breath, trying to focus. "Javier, we need to get power back online. Dr. Chun, check on the crew. Make sure they're okay." Javier glanced up from the console. "We're working on it, but if another tremor hits, we could lose everything. I don't know how much longer we can hold this together." Naomi swallowed hard. The next few moments would determine whether they would survive or be consumed by the planet's fury. As the seconds stretched into what felt like hours, Naomi's mind raced. They were on the edge, and Mars was pushing them to their limits. It was no longer just about surviving on a barren planet. It was about withstanding the full force of a world that had no intention of giving up its secrets without a fight. Mars is showing its full power as the crew faces increasingly dangerous tremors and the possibility of a volcanic eruption. What do you think will happen next? Can Naomi and her crew survive the forces of Mars, or will the planet prove too much for them? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The tremors continued their relentless assault on the habitat, shaking the fragile walls and infrastructure with every passing second. Naomi had never felt so small, standing there in the control room as her team scrambled to keep the systems running. Every passing moment felt like a countdown, as though Mars itself was preparing for a final, earth-shattering blow. She tried to focus on the task at hand, restoring power, securing the habitat, and ensuring the crew's safety, but her mind kept wandering back to the warnings from Dr. Chun. The geological data, the increased frequency of the tremors, the signs of Mars waking up. There was no ignoring the possibility anymore. They were living on borrowed time. Javier's voice cut through Naomi's thoughts. "Naomi, I need you to listen. The power's on the brink of total collapse. We're running on emergency backup now, but it won't last long. If we don't get the main grid stabilized, we're going to lose everything. The whole system could go down." Naomi nodded, but the weight of the situation was pressing on her chest. "Can we override the grid from here? Can we bypass the failure points?" "I can try," Javier replied, his voice strained, but his hands still moved with practiced precision. "But it's risky. If I make the wrong move, we could lose all systems at once." Naomi hesitated, the thought of taking a risk so extreme gnawing at her. But there was no other choice. "Do it. We don't have time to wait for a miracle. Just be careful." As Javier worked, Naomi turned to Dr. Chun, who was frantically scanning the data coming from their sensors. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. The tremors are getting worse, Dr. Chen said. I'm seeing massive seismic spikes, almost as if something's building up beneath the surface. This is what I feared. We need to get to higher ground, away from the faults. I think we have a few hours at best before the worst of it hits. Naomi's heart raced. Hours? That wasn't nearly enough time. They had to make a choice. Stay and fight to maintain the habitat, or evacuate and hope they could make it to a safe zone before the volcanoes erupted. Do we have a safe zone? Naomi asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Dr. Chan bit her lip. The closest is a high plateau, about a 20-kilometer trek from here. But the terrain's unstable, and we can't guarantee we'll make it there in time. Naomi closed her eyes, feeling the weight of their dilemma. She wanted to believe they could ride out the storm, that they could survive the eruption, but Mars was no longer playing by the rules. They needed to make a decision, and fast. Okay, Naomi said after a long pause, her voice firm. We start preparing for evacuation. Get the vehicles ready, and make sure everyone has their emergency packs. If we lose the habitat, we'll head for the plateau. Javier looked up from the control panel, his face drawn. We'll have to move fast. The backup systems won't last much longer, and if we get cut off from the base, we'll make it, Naomi said, cutting him off. We have to. The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity. The crew worked in overdrive, double-checking every system, packing supplies, and making sure their rover vehicles were ready to transport everyone to safety. The urgency in the air was palpable. Every rumble of the ground beneath their feet only added to the tension. Naomi's mind raced as she tried to coordinate everything. They were not just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for the future of humanity's first Martian colony. As the final preparations were made, Naomi stood at the entrance of the habitat, staring out into the desolate Martian landscape. The wind howled outside, carrying with it a strange, foreboding energy. She could feel it in her bones. Mars was no longer the blank slate they had come to conquer. It was a living, breathing entity with its own forces, its own power. And it was angry. Naomi, Dr. Chin said, stepping up beside her. The tremors, they're intensifying. I don't think we have much time left. Naomi nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon. The sun had set, casting an eerie red glow across the Martian surface. She knew they couldn't wait any longer. We go now, she said, her voice resolute. The crew filed into the rovers, strapping themselves in as Naomi gave one last, lingering glance at the habitat. This had been their home for the past 2 years, their sanctuary on a hostile planet. And now, it was all slipping away. The vehicles rumbled to life, and the crew began the long trek toward the high plateau. Naomi could feel the tension mounting with every mile they covered. The terrain was rocky and uneven, but the rovers held steady. As they climbed higher, the seismic activity seemed to escalate. The ground shook with increasing frequency, and Naomi's mind kept returning to the warning Dr. Chen had given her. Something was coming, a force far beyond anything they could control. Suddenly, a deafening roar filled the air. The ground trembled violently, knocking everyone off balance. Naomi gripped the steering wheel, her heart pounding in her chest. "Hold on," she shouted to the crew as she sped up, trying to keep the rover steady. Ahead of them, the sky seemed to split open as a brilliant flash of light illuminated the horizon. Naomi's eyes went wide in horror. No, it's happening. A massive eruption, far larger than anything they could have imagined, exploded from the surface of Mars. A column of fire and ash shot into the sky, filling the air with a thick, choking smoke. The tremors intensified, and Naomi could feel the heat from the eruption even from where they were. She slammed her foot on the accelerator, urging the rover forward, but the landscape was already shifting, the ground beneath them cracking open as the planet seemed to tear itself apart. Go! Go! Naomi yelled, her voice barely audible over the roar of the eruption. The plateau was close, but so was the volcanic disaster that had already begun to reshape the Martian surface. Ash rained down, coating everything in a fine layer of dust. The rovers struggled against the tremors, but Naomi pushed forward, unwilling to stop now. As they neared the base of the plateau, The ground shook again with such intensity that Naomi thought for a moment they might be swallowed whole. But then, they reached higher ground, and the shaking finally began to subside. The crew piled out of the rovers, gasping for air as they looked back at the devastation. The Martian landscape was unrecognizable, consumed by the eruption. In the distance, the habitat, once a beacon of hope, was no more than a smoldering ruin. Naomi collapsed to her knees, her breath ragged. They had made it, but at what cost? As the dust began to settle, Naomi stood, her eyes scanning the horizon. Mars had shown them its power, its unforgiving might. The dream of colonizing the Red Planet had just become far more complicated, but one thing was certain. They weren't done yet. They had survived the eruption. They had survived Mars. And now, they would have to rebuild. Mars has unleashed its fury, and Naomi and her crew have narrowly escaped a devastating eruption. What do you think will happen next? Can they rebuild on the plateau? Or is the risk of Mars too great? How should humanity approach colonization on such a hostile world? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The roar of the eruption still echoed in Naomi's ears, though the landscape around her had quieted. She stood at the edge of the plateau, the ash settling like a heavy blanket across Mars, obscuring much of the horizon. The night sky had turned a strange, ominous shade, the reddish glow from the eruption still casting a faint light over the crew's new refuge. It had been hours since the eruption had started, but it felt like a lifetime. They had escaped the initial blast, but Mars had made its presence known in a way that no one could ignore. The habitat they had worked so hard to build, the dream of humanity's first Martian colony, was gone, reduced to rubble and ash. They were alone on a planet that seemed more hostile than ever before. But Naomi refused to give in. Everyone's accounted for? Naomi asked, her voice hoarse. She had been checking on each crew member, making sure they were all safe after the harrowing journey to the plateau. The eruption had caused enough chaos to make the journey almost impossible, but against all odds, they had survived. Javier nodded, his face grim but determined. We're all here. No one's seriously injured. But that doesn't change the fact that our situation just became a lot more complicated. Naomi let out a long breath. Complicated doesn't even begin to describe it. Dr. Chun, who had been surveying the sky and scanning her handheld datapad, looked up. The seismic activity is still increasing. This wasn't just one eruption. Mars is still shifting beneath us. We could have aftershocks for days, maybe even weeks. Then we'll have to be ready, Naomi said firmly. We've survived the worst of it, but now we need to think about the future. Our future. The crew gathered around, listening intently. Everyone knew the stakes. They had just witnessed the planet's violent power firsthand, and now they were stranded with only the bare minimum of supplies. We can't stay here forever, Javier said, scanning the rocky terrain around them. The plateau is safe for now, but it won't be enough. We need to find a more sustainable place to build. And we need to secure resources, water, food, shelter, before Mars decides to remind us again who's in charge. We know the risks, Naomi replied, her voice steady despite the fear that still lingered in her chest. But we've come this far, and we can't let this setback stop us from pushing forward. This is still our mission. The dream hasn't changed. For the next few days, Naomi and the crew focused on immediate survival. They set up a temporary base on the plateau, using what little equipment they had salvaged from the destroyed habitat. Their rovers were still functional, but their supplies were dwindling, and the longer they stayed on Mars, the more challenging it became to find the resources they needed. Dr. Chun and Javier worked tirelessly to map out safe zones on the planet, using data from their sensors to predict areas that might be free from further seismic activity. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew worked on fortifying their temporary base, reinforcing the shelter they had built from the rover equipment. But every tremor that shook the ground was a reminder. Mars was not done with them yet. One evening, as Naomi sat in the shelter alone, staring at the fire they had managed to start with the limited supplies, her thoughts drifted back to Earth, to the people they had left behind, the world they had known, the comforts of home, the bustling cities, the warmth of human connection. She remembered Elon Musk's words when he first announced the mission to Mars. It had always been about the dream, the vision of a new world, a new frontier for humanity. But now, that dream seemed more fragile than ever. Still, Naomi's resolve was unshakable. She had led them through the worst of it, and she would lead them through whatever came next. She had no choice. The following day, after another series of tremors, Naomi called an emergency meeting. They couldn't stay on the plateau forever. The time had come to make a decision. "We need to move," she said, standing before the crew. "We've been fortunate up here, but we can't keep relying on luck. Mars is unstable. We need to find a more permanent place, somewhere we can start building again. And we need to find resources, water, shelter, power. We're running out of time." Javier raised an eyebrow. "You mean we're going to leave the plateau? After everything we've been through?" Naomi nodded. "We have to. We can't live in constant fear of another eruption. And we can't rebuild the colony here. We need to scout for safer terrain." "I agree," Dr. Chin added. "The seismic data we've gathered from the last few days suggests that the region to the north might be more stable. It's not without risk, but it's our best chance." Naomi glanced at the crew. "We all know the risks, but we've survived Mars before. We can do it again. This is just another step in our journey. We're not giving up. Not now." With their destination set, the crew packed up their equipment and prepared for the journey north. The trek would take them through some of the most treacherous terrain on Mars: rocky plains, steep cliffs, and unpredictable weather patterns. But if the data from Dr. Chin's scans were correct, there was a chance they could find a more stable location. A place where they could finally settle and begin rebuilding humanity's presence on Mars. As they set out, Naomi couldn't help but feel a strange sense of hope. They had come so close to losing everything. And yet, here they were, continuing on, moving forward despite the odds. Maybe that's what it meant to survive. To face the worst that the universe could throw at you, and still find a way to keep going. The journey was grueling. The crew battled harsh winds and freezing temperatures as they made their way north. Several times, they had to take shelter from violent dust storms that appeared out of nowhere, their rovers bouncing over Mars's rocky surface as they struggled to maintain their course. Every time the ground trembled, they paused, hearts in their throats, hoping that the next seismic wave wouldn't tear apart their fragile equipment. But they pressed on. And after days of travel, they finally reached the area Dr. Chun had predicted, a highland basin nestled between two massive mountain ranges. The ground was more stable, the air thinner, but the location was perfect. From here, they could begin to build. It wouldn't be easy, but they could start again. Naomi stood at the edge of the basin, looking out over the barren expanse of Mars. The mountains rose like ancient sentinels on either side, their jagged peaks dusted with the remains of a long-forgotten history. The valley before her was harsh, but it was theirs. It was a place where they could begin again. "We made it," Naomi whispered to herself, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. The crew unloaded their equipment and set to work. There was no time to waste. The dream was still alive, and with it, the hope for humanity's future on Mars. It would take years, decades, perhaps, to build what they had lost. But now, they had a second chance. And this time, they weren't going to let it slip away. As Naomi watched the sun rise over the Martian horizon, she knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. They had survived Mars. They had confronted the impossible, and they were still here. And nothing could take that away from them. The crew has made it to their new refuge, and their journey is far from over. What challenges do you think they'll face next on their path to rebuilding the colony? What would you do if you were in Naomi's shoes? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below.